You wake in complete darkness, not because the night refuses to end, but because the winter in this northern village keeps the sun hidden for many hours past a southern morning, and your body knows the time long before any light confirms it. The inside of the izba, the small log house, rests in a silence so deep that your own breathing becomes the first clear sound, a soft tide that matches the slow rhythm of the stove's dying warmth still pressed into the air. You lie on the wide sleeping shelf above the great clay stove, a platform of smooth planks covered by a worn sheepskin and a heavy quilt of patched wool, and you let your eyelids stay closed a little longer while your mind climbs gently out of sleep without hurry. The darkness has a quality of thickness, a felt presence made of chimney soot, dried herbs hanging from the rafters, and the faint animal scent of the sheepskin. All of it familiar to your senses, like the contours of your own hands. Beneath you, the stove exhales the last of its heat in long, slow waves that rise through the wooden shelf and loosen the stiffness that the long night laid into your shoulders. You push the quilt aside inch by inch, not from any sense of duty that rushes you, but because this is simply the way the morning begins, the same as yesterday and the 1,000 yesterdays before it. And you feel your way down from the shelf with bare feet, finding the cool rungs of the ladder that are worn smooth from generations of climbing. The floorboards meet your soles with a grit of fine sand scattered to catch dirt, and you stand for a moment in the dark room, your breath now visible as a ghost that you cannot see, a faint whisper of white in the black air that smells of old birch embers and the resinous memory of pine logs. The stove, a massive box of clay and brick that fills a third of the living space, holds a single orange eye where a coal still glows beneath a thick blanket of ash, and you move toward that point of warmth as a moth might, if a moth could move so slowly. Your hands know where to find the iron poker, the stack of split birch logs in the corner, the clay pot of water that never freezes as long as the stove lives, and with movements that have long since become automatic, you stir the coals and lay 3 thin sticks of kindling across the orange eye. Then blow gently until a small flame licks upward and casts the first true light into the room. The flame catches on the pitchy bark and spreads to a larger piece of birch, lighting the immediate circle around the stove in a wavering amber glow that shows the rough log walls, the single small window sealed with translucent fish skin, the wooden bench along the wall, and the pots hanging from pegs. Shadows dance briefly but then settle as the fire grows steady, and you place a small iron pot filled with water and a handful of cracked barley grains onto the stovetop, where it will warm slowly while you dress. Dressing is a quiet ceremony that requires no thought, only the patient layering that every Pomor child learns before they can walk. You first pull on a long undershirt of soft linen that has been washed so many times it holds the shape of your shoulders, then a thicker shirt of wool with sleeves that close tightly at the wrists. Trousers of heavy felt come next, drawn up over the linen underdrawers that reach your ankles, and you tie them with a woven cord, not too tight, just enough to stay in place. The real armor against the cold comes afterward. Foot wraps of undyed wool that you wind around each foot and calf in a precise spiral, taking care that no crease will press into the skin during long hours of stillness. Then tall boots of felt that reach nearly to your knees, their soles stitched with strips of reindeer hide. A short jacket of sheepskin, the fleece turned inward, settles over your wool shirt, its weight immediate and reassuring, and over that goes a longer outer coat of reindeer fur with a high collar that will stand between your neck and the wind. You work your hands into mittens of seal skin, the fur facing out to shed moisture, and you tuck the mittens into the sleeves of the outer coat so that no gap remains. A hat of fox fur with ear flaps that tie under the chin completes the shell of warmth, and by the time you are fully dressed, you feel less like a man and more like a soft, padded creature built for this one purpose, to endure the cold without complaint. The barley is softened in its warm water by the time you finish dressing, and you ladle it into a wooden bowl whose rim has darkened with age. You sit on the bench near the stove, the bowl cradled in both hands, and you eat slowly, spooning the grains into your mouth one small portion at a time, chewing with the patience of someone who knows that food is not entertainment, but fuel. The barley tastes of earth and wood smoke, unsalted and plain, and you drink the warm, cloudy water left in the bowl when the grains are gone. There is a piece of dried fish hanging from a rafter, hard and leathery, and you break off a strip to chew later, tucking it into an inner pocket of your outer coat, along with a small lump of rendered seal fat wrapped in birch bark. These will be your companions through the day, taken only if hunger rises past the point of distraction. The room around you has brightened now, not from any sun, but from the fire that has settled into a calm, steady burn, and you use this light to prepare the last items you will need. The harpoon stands in the corner where it always stands, a shaft of straight-grained spruce as tall as you are, its iron head protected by a sleeve of oiled leather tied with sinew. You check the binding that holds the head to the shaft, running your thumb along the sinew cord to feel for any looseness. But the lashing is tight and smooth. The throwing line, a long coil of braided sealskin strips, rests on a peg, and you lift it down and test its strength with a gentle pull before looping it over your shoulder so that it crosses your chest like a bandolier. A small wooden scoop for clearing ice from the breathing hole, shaped like a flattened spoon with a short handle, slides into your belt. The piece of reindeer hide that you will sit on, folded into a neat square, gets tucked under your arm, and you take a last look around the room to see if anything has been forgotten, though nothing ever is, because the rhythm of this preparation follows the same quiet choreography every single morning of the sealing season. The door of the isba is a heavy slab of pine, its edges wrapped in felt to keep out the drafts, and you lift the wooden latch with a soft clunk that seems very loud in the stillness. A rush of cold air, dry and sharp, pushes into the room as you open the door just enough to slip through, and you step outside into a world that is still entirely dark except for the stars. The cold meets your exposed cheeks like a cloth soaked in ice water, but it is not yet the deep, numbing cold of the open sea, only the yard cold of the village, and you stand for a moment on the trampled snow of the doorstep while your lungs adjust to breathing air that feels thin and metallic. The sky above is a great bowl of black crystal, scattered with more stars than you could ever count, and the constellations that guide Pomor sailors the elk, the hunter, the great sledge hang, in their winter positions as they have hung for every seal hunter since the first hunters came to this coast. The moon, a slim crescent turned on its back, pours a silver wash over the snow that is enough to see by once your eyes grow accustomed, and you register the shapes of the other isbays around you, their roofs humped with snow like the backs of sleeping animals, their chimneys dark and silent. No one else is awake yet. The village belongs entirely to you and the cold. You begin to walk, following the path that your own feet have stamped into the snow over the previous days, a narrow trough between the houses that leads away from the village toward the shore. The snow underfoot makes a steady crunching sound, a sort of low, rhythmic complaint that breaks the silence at regular intervals, and this sound becomes a companion of sorts, a metronome for your steps. You pass the last isba, where an old dog sleeping under the eaves lifts its head, recognizes your scent, and drops back into its dreams without a sound. And then you are beyond the village and walking through the open land that separates the settlement from the sea. This is a zone of low, wind-shaped hummocks and the occasional dark tuft of last summer's grass poking through the snow, all of it painted in shades of blue and grey by the starlight. The wind, which had been a faint murmur among the village walls, now finds you with its full attention, pushing steadily from the north, and you turn your face slightly aside and continue walking. The path leads you down a gentle slope toward the edge of the land, where the snow gives way to a jumble of frozen blocks and slabs that mark the tide line of a sea that is now trapped under ice. You step over a low ridge of frozen gravel and onto the white sea, and the feeling under your boots changes immediately. The snow here is thinner and harder, packed by the wind into a crust that supports your weight with a slight give, and the surface stretches away ahead of you in a flat white plain that merges seamlessly with the white sky where the stars meet the horizon. You know the direction to walk, not by any marker on the ice, but by the angle of the elk constellation to your left shoulder and the memory of many journeys out across this same frozen bay, and you set off across the sea ice with the same unhurried gait, your boots sinking less than an inch into the wind-packed crust, leaving behind a trail of clean footprints that will still be there when you return. The village behind you shrinks with each 100 steps, the dark roofs dissolving into the dark shore, and soon you are alone on the ice with nothing around you but frozen water and frozen air. The breathing hole that you are walking toward is not just any opening in the ice. It is a specific place, a place you've known for several winters, a place where the water underneath remains open just enough for a seal to rise and breathe if it chooses to come. You have kept this hole cleared of the thin skin ice that forms each day, breaking it with the wooden scoop and skimming the fragments away so that the water stays black and accessible. The seals know this hole, and sometimes they use it. They're never when you expect them to, and the understanding you have with the hole is not one of demand, but of waiting. You will sit beside it today, just as you sat beside it yesterday, offering nothing but your patience and your stillness, and the seals will decide what the seals will decide, as they always have. The walk across the ice takes you past low ridges of broken ice that have been pushed up by the currents before freezing solid, their edges blunted by the wind, so that they resemble waves turned to stone, and you thread between them without altering your pace. The stars, which had been so sharp when you left the Isba, begin to lose their clarity as the sky in the east undergoes a gradual change. A slow dilution of the black into a deep grey that is barely a colour at all, more of an absence of darkness. This is the true dawn of the northern winter, a creeping transition that takes an hour or more, and you watch it happen without stopping, noting the way the horizon sharpens into a distinct line between the ice and the sky. The breathing hole is still some distance ahead. You cannot see it yet, but you feel its presence the way a farmer feels the well at the end of his field, a point of purpose around which the entire landscape arranges itself. When you are near enough to make out the small dark circle against the white, you slow your steps and approach with the same quiet care you always use, not wanting to send any unnecessary vibrations through the ice that might startle a seal already there, though no seal is ever there when you arrive. The hole is a perfect round, less than an arm span across, its surface a circle of water so dark it looks like oil, and a thin lens of new ice, no thicker than an eggshell, has formed across it since yesterday. You kneel beside the hole, set down the hide and the harpoon, and use the wooden scoop to gently break that new ice, pulling the fragments out and dropping them to one side where they glitter briefly and then become part of the general snow. The water underneath stirs with the intrusion and then goes still again, reflecting the grey sky like a mirror of polished obsidian, and you spread the reindeer hide on the ice a short distance back from the edge, where your seated weight will not crack the lip of the hole, and you sit down with your legs crossed, the harpoon laid across your lap, your mittened hands resting on your knees, and you become as motionless as the ice itself. The seal hunter has arrived at his post. The waiting begins. The path from the village to the sea is a single trail pressed into the snow by the repeated passing of your own boots over days that have turned into weeks, and this morning it leads you away from the dark cluster of sleeping Isbas into a landscape that holds nothing but the snow and the sky and the gradual thinning of the stars. You walk with the slow, measured step of someone who is not traveling to a destination so much as moving through a state of cold, your body wrapped in its many layers of fur and wool, so that the only exposed part of you is a small strip of skin around your eyes and the bridge of your nose, and even that you will occasionally shield with the back of a mitten when the wind angles toward you. The crunch of your felt boots on the crust is the only sound that keeps pace with you, a soft and steady percussion that seems to deepen the silence around it rather than break it, the way a single drop of water falling into a still pond only amplifies the stillness that receives it. Ahead of you, the land undulates in low, gentle swells that the winter has smoothed into forms as soft as a sleeping body under a white blanket. The snow has covered every sharp edge, every rock, every tuft of summer grass, so that the world appears as a continuous surface of pale grey under the starlight, its texture coming only from the faint shadows that the wind has sculpted into tiny ridges and ripples. You follow the trail without needing to look down, your feet knowing the exact width and depth of the trough they've created, and your mind, freed from decisions, sinks into a quiet state that is not quite thought and not quite emptiness, a sort of rhythm that matches the rhythm of your heartbeat and the rhythm of your breathing and the rhythm of the snow under your soles. The air that you draw into your lungs is cold enough that you can feel the individual molecules as they pass through your nostrils, a sharp, dry sensation that wakes the inner passages and then warms slowly inside your chest before emerging as a plume of vapor that drifts behind you and dissolves into the dark. You breathe in through your nose and out through your mouth, a pattern you learned long ago to prevent ice from forming on the wool of your face covering, and each exhalation contributes its small cloud to the larger cloud of your passage, a ghost train that follows you across the frozen land. The cold has a presence today, not the brutal, biting cold of a storm, but the steady, insistent cold that simply is, that has been since the autumn and will remain until the spring, and you accept it, the way a fish accepts the pressure of deep water. To your left, the land slopes away toward a frozen marsh where the summer sedges sleep under the snow, and the ice beneath the snow is black and solid, and to your right, the land rises toward a low ridge of stunted birch trees that are more like shrubs, their thin, twisted branches barely clearing the snow surface. You pass a single boulder that sits half-buried, a glacial erratic that the old people say was dropped by a giant who once walked these shores, though everyone knows it was left by the ice sheet that retreated many thousands of years ago, and you touch its snow-capped top with your mitten as you pass, a small gesture of greeting that you have performed since childhood, and now perform without thinking. The boulder does not acknowledge you, and you do not expect it to, but the small ritual marks a point in the journey where the village is now truly behind you and the sea is drawing near. The stars above continue their slow wheel toward the west, and you notice that the constellation of the Elk has shifted slightly, its antler stars now pointing more directly at the horizon where the dawn will eventually appear. The moon, that slim crescent that had been lying on its back when you stepped out of the Isba, has grown even fainter as the sky in the east begins to change from black to a deep, bruised blue that is the color of a fresh seal liver, and then to a softer gray that spreads upward like water soaking into cloth. This process is so gradual that you cannot identify the exact moment when the transition occurs. You only know that one time, when you lift your eyes to check your bearing, the stars are crisp and numerous, and the next time you lift your eyes, the faintest stars have vanished and the brighter ones have grown pale, as if they are withdrawing to a greater distance. The path you follow now dips into a shallow hollow where the wind has swept the snow into an especially smooth surface that glimmers faintly with a crust of refrozen melt from a previous sunny day. Your boots break through this crust with a sharper sound, a sort of brittle crackle that is different from the usual crunch, and for a dozen steps you hear this new note in the snow's voice before you climb out of the hollow and the sound returns to the softer, deeper crunch of packed powder. The passage through the hollow also brings you out of the wind for a moment, and in that brief shelter you hear your own breathing more clearly, and the faint swish of your outer coat's fur against itself, small sounds that the wind had been carrying away. Then you rise out of the hollow, and the wind finds you again, a steady northerly push that is not strong enough to hinder your walking, but persistent enough to remind you that you are a soft, warm thing, moving through a world that would freeze you solid if you stopped for too long. The first sign that you are approaching the shore comes not as a sight, but as a change in the slope of the land, a slight flattening that tells your feet you have left the gentle hillocks behind and are now walking on the level plain that borders the sea. The snow here is different, thinner, and with a coarser texture, because the winds off the ice are stronger and they sweep the surface more aggressively, polishing it to a hard sheen that in some places resembles glazed pottery. You notice that your footprints from yesterday, which had been distinct when you made them, have been partly filled by the drifting snow, their edges softened so that they look like the impressions of a heavier animal that passed this way long ago. Tomorrow they will be filled entirely, and you will make new ones, and that is simply the way of things. Now you begin to see the dark shapes ahead, low and humped against the lighter grey of the horizon, and you recognize them as the Pomor boats that have been hauled up onto the shore for the winter. These are lodias, the broad-beamed sailing vessels that the men of the village use in the summer to chase cod and hunt seal in the open water. But now they lie upside down on log rollers, their hulls covered with tarpaulins of stitched reindeer hide that are weighted down with stones and mounded with snow. Each boat looks like a sleeping whale from this distance, a long dark form that is waiting for the return of the liquid sea, and you walk among them as you approach the shore, passing close enough to reach out and touch the frozen tarpaulin of the nearest one, feeling the cold, stiff, canvas-like hide under your mitten and the hard shape of the hull planks beneath. The boats smell faintly of tar and old fish and salt, even in this dry cold, and the scent stirs a memory of summer in your mind before you let it go and continue walking. Beyond the boats, The land gives way to the shore proper, a zone of transition where the snow-covered earth meets the snow-covered ice in a jumble of frozen blocks and crevices that mark the tide line. Here, the sea's breathing, its daily rise and fall, has been halted by the grip of winter, but the evidence of that halted motion remains in the contorted shapes of the ice along the edge, slabs that have been pushed up and tilted at angles, then frozen in place like a photograph of a wave. You step carefully through this zone, not because it is dangerous, but because the footing is uneven, and you have learned that an unhurried hunter is a hunter who does not twist an ankle on a hidden ridge. The snow that fills the gaps between the ice slabs is deeper and softer than the snow on the land, and your boots sink past the ankles into its loose powder, leaving holes that look like the tracks of some heavy, deliberate creature. When you step past the last of the jumbled ice onto the open sea ice, the world changes in a way that you feel as much as you see. The surface that receives your weight now is entirely flat, a single sheet that stretches northward without interruption, and the snow on top of it is thin and wind-packed, so hard that your boots leave only the faintest impression. The shore behind you, with its boats and its low hills, becomes a dark line that grows thinner with each step, and the sound of your walking changes to a lighter, crisper note, a sort of shh, that is more like the sound of a broom sweeping a wooden floor than the crunch of snow on land. The world around you simplifies into three elements: the white plain below, the grey dome above, and the boundary between them where a thin band of pale orange is now beginning to glow at the eastern edge. You walk toward that glow not because the breathing hole lies in that direction, but because the hole lies somewhere between you and the light, and the light provides a reference that is easier to follow than the constellations which have now faded completely. The sea ice is not perfectly featureless. Scattered across its surface are occasional hummocks of older ice, pressure ridges where two sheets have collided and ground against each other, their edges rounded by the wind into forms that resemble the backs of swimming animals. You pass one such ridge, a low wall of translucent greenish ice that rises to your waist, and the light of the coming dawn catches in its interior, making it glow briefly with a cold internal fire before you leave it behind. The silence on the open ice is of a different quality than the silence on the land. It is deeper, emptier, a silence that contains the memory of the water beneath it, and the knowledge of immense distance. When you stop walking for a moment to adjust the coil of line over your shoulder, the absence of your own footsteps is so complete that you can hear a faint ringing in your ears. The sound of your own blood moving, the soft rush of a circulatory system that is entirely unaware of the ice and the cold and the grey sky above it. You resume walking, and the rhythm of your steps re-establishes itself as a thin thread of sound in the vast quiet. The sky continues to brighten, the orange band expanding and softening into a wash of pale gold that pushes the grey higher, and the snow around you begins to take on colours that it did not have before, a hint of lavender in the shadows, a touch of rose on the windward slopes of the tiny ripples, a general warming of the white toward a creamy ivory. Your own shadow, which had not existed at all in the starlight, now appears on the snow to your left, a long, thin companion that stretches away toward the west, and you watch it for a while, noting how its head bobs slightly with each step, a silent mimic that imitates your every movement but makes no sound. The breathing hole is still some distance ahead. You cannot see it yet, but you feel its pull as a faint certainty in your chest, a sort of compass that does not rely on sight. You have walked this route so many times that your body carries a map of the ice in its muscles, recording the subtle variations in slope and texture, the placement of the larger hummocks, the slight depression where the current underneath sometimes causes the ice to sag. You pass through that depression now, a shallow basin 100 paces across where the snow is slightly softer because the ice here is thinner and the water beneath is slightly warmer, and you register the change in footing without breaking stride. A single raven passes overhead, flying low and silent toward the shore, its black wings making a soft wuff-wuff sound as they beat the air. And you lift your head to watch it go, the first living creature you have seen since leaving the village. The raven does not call out, and you do not call to it. Each of you is on your own path, and the paths simply cross and then diverge. The dawn now fills half the sky, a great spreading of grey and gold, and the faintest hint of green right at the horizon, and the surface of the ice reflects this light, so that you seem to be walking through a bowl of pale, diluted honey. The cold has not lessened. If anything, it has deepened slightly with the coming of the true day, as often happens when the sun, still hidden below the horizon, begins to stir the air and send small drafts across the open ice. You feel the cold pressing against your cheeks with a new insistence, and you pull the fox-fur hat slightly lower and hunch your shoulders within the reindeer coat. Small adjustments that you make without thinking. The strip of dried fish in your inner pocket presses against your chest, a small hard rectangle that you will nibble later if the cold demands more fuel. But for now, your body is content with the warm grains you ate in the isba, and you walk on. The breathing hole, when it finally comes into view, is not a dramatic revelation, but a gradual emerging, a small dark dot on the white that slowly resolves into a circle, then into the specific circle that you have kept open through the long winter. You see it from a long way off, a speck of black in the vast whiteness, and you do not alter your pace or your direction because the hole is exactly where you expected it to be, at the intersection of the memory in your muscles and the landmark of a low-pressure ridge that runs north to south like a frozen seam. As you draw closer, you can see the faint sheen of new ice that has formed across the opening since yesterday, a skin of silver that tells you no seal has used the hole in the hours since you last cleared it. This is neither good nor bad, it is simply information. The same information the hole has given you every morning, and you accept it as you accept the cold and the light and the sound of your own footsteps. The breathing hole waits for you, patient and dark, and you walk the last 100 paces toward it, ready to begin the long stillness of the day. You stop a few paces from the breathing hole and let the quiet of the open ice settle around you like a weight being laid gently on your shoulders. The hole is a dark circle cut into the white, no wider than the span of your arms, and the water inside it is black and still, holding a perfect reflection of the pale grey sky that has now spread from horizon to horizon. A thin skin of new ice, so fresh it is still transparent, covers the surface like a sheet of glass that blurs the boundary between air and water, and the sight of that delicate seal tells you what you already knew. No seal has risen here since yesterday. You stand for a moment looking down at the hole, listening to the faint shush of the wind over the snow crust and the deeper silence underneath. Then you lower the square of reindeer, hide from under your arm, place it on the ice several steps back from the edge, and begin the small, unhurried ritual of preparing your station. The wooden scoop hangs from your belt, and you work it free with a motion that is slow and deliberate, because cold wood can snap if handled roughly. The scoop is a simple tool, a flat piece of birch carved into a shallow bowl at one end and smoothed by years of use, its surface darkened by the oil of many seals and the tannin of the water it has skinned. You kneel beside the hole, not on both knees, but on one, the other leg braced behind you in the posture of a hunter who might need to stand quickly, even though you have never needed to stand quickly at this hole. And you lean forward to reach the new ice with the lip of the scoop. The ice breaks without resistance, a faint tinkling sound like a spoon tapping a crystal glass, and the pieces float as tiny islands on the dark water, some shaped like lily pads and some like jagged shards. You draw the scoop toward you gently, capturing the fragments in the shallow bowl, then lift them clear and set them aside on the snow where they glitter once in the low dawn light, and then become indistinguishable from the surrounding white. The water underneath is revealed again, black and deep, and so still that it seems solid, a circle of polished jet set into the ice floor, and you watch it for a long moment to make sure no wisp of sediment clouds its clarity, for a clouded hole is a hole that has been disturbed by something moving below. The water remains clear and empty. You repeat the scooping motions 3 more times, each pass collecting smaller fragments that had escaped the first, until the opening is as clean as it was when you first cut the hole many days ago. A slight film of water clings to the scoop, freezing almost instantly into a cloudy varnish, and you tap the tool against the ice beside you to knock the frost free before returning it to your belt. Your mitten has grown damp at the fingertips where you gripped the scoop, and you press the damp wool against the fur of your coat to blot away the moisture, knowing that damp mittens in the deep cold will stiffen and lose their warmth. Then you rise from your kneeling position, the stiffness in your knee reminding you that you have been still for several minutes already, and you walk back to the folded reindeer hide. The hide is not large, just enough to insulate you from the ice beneath when you sit, and you spread it with the hair side down so that your weight will press the warm fur into the cold surface. You lower yourself onto it slowly, first crossing your legs at the ankles, then folding them beneath you in a posture that brings your body into a compact shape. Your knees drawn up and your arms wrapped loosely around them. The harpoon lies beside you on the ice, its long spruce shaft, straight and light, the iron head still sheathed in its oiled leather guard, and you place your right hand on it, not because you expect to use it, but because the haft is a familiar object that your fingers know well, its surface worn smooth by the grip of your father and his father before him. The coil of braided sealskin line rests across your chest, its weight a gentle pressure that rises and falls with your breathing. Now you are settled, and the station is complete. A seated man on a piece of fur beside a dark circle of water on an endless plain of ice under a sky that has brightened to the color of old pewter. The horizon is a clean line dividing the world into two halves, the white below and the grey above, and you sit at the exact center of your own awareness, the breathing hole before you like a pupil in the white eye of the sea. The cold, which had been a moving companion during your walk, now becomes a stationary presence that presses against you from all sides, testing the seams of your clothing and the thickness of your furs, and you answer its questions by remaining perfectly still, letting your body generate only the heat it needs, and no more. The outer coat of reindeer fur, with its hollow hairs that trap the air, holds a pocket of warmth around your trunk, and the fox fur hat keeps the heat from escaping through the crown of your head, while the sealskin mittens allow your fingers to rest in a dry, comfortable coolness that is not yet cold. Your breathing slows as you sit, not because you command it to, but because stillness invites slowness, and you feel the steady rhythm of your exhalations steaming out from the opening in your face covering, each puff a small cloud that rises a hand's breadth before the wind tears it gently away. You watch your breath clouds appear and disappear, and you begin to count them, not with numbers, but with the simple awareness of one following another, a chain of small white ghosts that link you to the air. The wind on the ice is a subtle thing today, not a constant blow, but a drifting movement that comes from the north in soft, irregular pulses, each one lifting a fine spray of loose snow crystals from the wind-packed crust and carrying them across the surface in low, snaking ribbons that hiss faintly like sand across stone. When one of these ribbons passes over the breathing hole, the dark water does not react. It simply absorbs the snowflakes without a ripple, accepting them into its black depth. The light continues to change around you in increments so small that they are visible only when you look away, and then look back, the way the hour hand of a clock seems frozen until you return to find it has moved. A band of pale gold now lies along the eastern horizon, and above it the grey has taken on a mother-of-pearl iridescence, hints of shell pink and the faintest blue-green playing across the undersides of a layer of cloud, so high it appears stationary. The ice fields around you, which had been a uniform white, now reveal their subtle contours in the angled light, and you can see the way the snow has been sculpted by the wind into long, parallel ridges that run north to south like the grain of a great piece of wood. The pressure ridge to your left, the one you had used as a landmark on your walk out, catches the golden light on its western face while its eastern face remains in shadow, a pale blue wall that looks cold enough to break a tooth. Inside your clothing, your body maintains its quiet economy, the heart beating slowly, the blood retreating from the skin to warm the deeper organs, the toes inside your felt boots wiggling occasionally to stir the warm air trapped there. You feel the hard shape of the dried fish against your chest, and you consider it for a moment, but the hunger is not yet strong enough to warrant the effort of unwrapping your face covering and exposing your mouth to the cold, so you let the fish wait. The small lump of seal fat, wrapped in its birch bark, remains in the inner pocket alongside the fish, a dense, white fuel that your body knows how to use, converting the fat into a long, slow warmth that will sustain you for many hours. You've eaten such fat since you were old enough to chew, and you have no opinion about its taste. It is simply the food that the winter provides, taken from the blubber of a seal your father caught 3 winters ago, rendered down in the big iron pot over the Isba stove, and poured into birch bark molds to cool. The memory of that rendering day passes through your mind without attaching to any emotion, the steam filling the house, the smell of hot blubber that coated every surface, the sound of the fat bubbling slowly in the pot while your mother stirred it with a long wooden paddle, the way the winter light came through the fish-skin window and made the steam blow. That was a different day, in a different season of the same long winter, and now you are here, sitting beside a breathing hole, and the fat of that seal is waiting in your pocket to become your own warmth. The breathing hole holds your attention without demanding it. You gaze at the circle of dark water, and your focus shifts gently from its surface to its depths and back again, a slow oscillation that matches the rhythm of your breathing. The water is so clear that you can see a short distance into it, where the pale green of the submerged ice changes to a deeper blue that fades into black, and occasionally a tiny bubble of gas, released from the seafloor far below, rises through the column and reaches the surface, where it bursts without sound, leaving a brief dimple that smooths over instantly. These bubbles are the only evidence that anything lives beneath the ice, and you watch for them the way a shepherd watches the grass for the movement of his flock. Though you know the bubbles tell you nothing about the seals, they are simply the exhalations of the sea itself, a slow, continuous breathing that continues whether you are present or not. You shift your weight slightly, leaning a fraction to the right to relieve a pressure point on your left hip, and the adjustment makes the reindeer hide rustle beneath you in a soft, dry whisper. In the immense quiet of the ice, this whisper sounds loud, and you pause in the middle of the movement to let the silence reassert itself. The wind ruffles the fur of your hat, and you feel the cold air find the small gap between the hat and the collar of your coat, a thin, searching finger that touches the skin of your neck and reminds you to tighten the drawstring of the hat. You do so with your right mitten, pulling the cord until the opening closes snugly around your face, and then your hands return to their resting place on your knees. Time on the ice does not pass in the way it passes in the village. In the village, time is marked by the movement of the sun across the window, by the tasks that follow one another in a sequence, by the sound of the church bell, if the village had a church bell, which this small Pomor settlement does not. Here, time is measured only by the slow rotation of the sky and the gradual changes in the quality of the light. You have no water clock and no sand glass, only your own internal sense of duration, which has been shaped by many winters of sitting in exactly this way. You know that you have been sitting for less than an hour because the sun has not yet cleared the horizon and your body has not yet entered the deep settled cold that comes after the second hour. You know that you will sit for many more hours, and you are not impatient for them to pass, because impatience is a heat that the cold will eventually extinguish, so you let it go before it can arise. The breathing hole, meanwhile, remains a perfect, unchanging circle in front of you. The water inside neither rises nor falls, because the ice holds the sea in a rigid grip and no current stirs the surface. The only movement is the occasional arrival of a small, wind-driven snow crystal that lands on the water and hesitates for a moment. A tiny star of white on the black mirror before it dissolves and is gone. Each crystal that lands is different, though you cannot see the differences, and each one melts at its own speed, some lasting long enough for you to notice their shape before they vanish, others disappearing so quickly they seem never to have existed at all. This pattern of arrival and dissolution is the only event at the breathing hole, and you watch it without following individual crystals, letting the general pattern wash over your awareness the way the sound of the wind washes over your ears. Your mind, having nothing to grip onto, begins to wander in the slow, aimless way of a cloud crossing a windless sky. You think about the seals that must be swimming somewhere in the dark water beneath the ice, their sleek bodies moving through the cold ocean with a grace you can only imagine, their lungs holding an enormous breath that they took at the surface some minutes ago. The seals know the locations of all the breathing holes that the hunters keep open, and they use them according to a schedule that no hunter has ever deciphered, sometimes visiting one hole 3 days in a row, then abandoning it for a week in favor of another, a pattern that seems random until you remember that the seals are not subject to patterns in the way that human minds require. The seals simply do what the seals do, and your job is not to predict their behavior, but to be present when their behavior brings them to your particular circle of water. This thought, which is not a new thought, settles into your mind like a stone settling into the bottom of a still pond, and you let it rest there without stirring it. Your gaze lifts from the hole and travels out across the ice field to the east, where the horizon has now developed a distinct golden rim that is the first direct light of the sun, though the sun itself is still hidden behind the curve of the earth. That rim brightens slowly while you watch, the gold intensifying to a thin line of brass, and the clouds directly above it catch the color and hold it in their lower folds, glowing with a subdued buttery light that is the most beautiful thing you will see today, though you do not think of it in those terms. You simply register the change as you would register a change in the direction of the wind. The light spreads along the horizon in both directions, reaching north and south in a slow, silent expansion, and the ice fields that were blue-gray in the pre-dawn now take on a warmer tone, their surface becoming a pale amber mirror that reflects the sky with a fidelity that the sea in summer never achieves. You lower your eyes back to the breathing hole, and the dark water has not changed. The light around it has changed, and the snow around it has changed, but the water itself remains the same absolute black, a color that absorbs all the gold and amber and rose without giving anything back. This contrast between the brightening world and the unresponsive hole is part of the reason you can sit here for hours without going mad. The hole serves as a kind of anchor for your attention, a fixed point that does not flicker or waver, and your mind uses that anchor to steady itself against the immense, shifting emptiness of the ice and sky. You let your breathing slow further until your chest rises and falls with a gentleness that barely disturbs the air, and you feel the long, slow hour ahead of you like a path that you have walked many times and will walk again, a path that leads nowhere except to the next moment of stillness. The first hour of stillness begins not with a decision, but with a settling, a slow surrender of your body to the ice and the cold and the grey light that now covers the whole sky. You sit on the reindeer hide with your legs folded beneath you, your hands resting on your knees inside their sealskin mittens, your face turned toward the breathing hole, and you allow the minutes to pass without measuring them. The cold that had been a moving presence during your walk is now a stationary weight that presses evenly against every part of you, a pressure that comes from all sides and has no urgency. It finds the exposed strip of skin around your eyes and presses there most insistently, a dull, constant sensation that you have learned to accept as part of the sitting. And you blink slowly, letting your eyelids close for a moment, then open again, each blink spreading a thin film of moisture that the cold air immediately cools. Your breathing has settled into a rhythm that matches the stillness, each inhale drawing the sharp, dry air deep into your lungs, each exhale releasing a plume of vapor that rises a short distance before the wind takes it and scatters it into nothing. The vapor plumes are smaller now than they were during the walk, because your body is producing less heat and requiring less air, and you watch them appear and disappear with a detached awareness, not counting them, not analyzing their shape, simply registering their existence as a sign that you are still breathing and the world is still receiving your breath. The wind that takes your breath away is a faint, intermittent drift from the north, so gentle that you feel it more as a change in the temperature against your cheek than as a force that pushes against your body, and it carries with it the clean, empty smell of frozen air that has traveled across hundreds of miles of ice without touching anything alive. The light continues to change in the eastern sky, a slow, silent transformation that holds your attention without demanding it. The band of pale gold that lay along the horizon has widened and softened, spreading upward into the grey dome like a stain of wheat tea soaking into paper, and the grey itself has begun to shift toward a soft blue, the color of a distant mountain seen through haze. The ice field around you responds to this new light by revealing details that the starlight had hidden, the fine, parallel ridges sculpted by the wind, the tiny pits where wind-driven snow grains have etched the surface, the faint bluish shadows that pool in the depressions between the ridges. The breathing hole itself, that perfect circle of dark water, now reflects a patch of the pale blue sky, and the reflection makes the water seem even darker by contrast, a circle of absolute absence in a world of increasing brightness. The sun, still hidden below the horizon, is now close enough to rising that its light bends around the curve of the earth and paints the undersides of the highest clouds with a faint, rosy warmth. You lift your eyes from the hole for a moment and watch those clouds, thin streaks of vapor that hang motionless in the upper air, and you note how their eastern edges glow pink while their western edges remain grey. A gradation so subtle it might be an illusion created by your own staring. The clouds do not move and do not change shape. They are simply there, part of the sky's slow pageantry, and after a time you lower your eyes back to the hole and find that it has not changed, the water still black, the surface still smooth, the reflection still holding its small piece of blue sky. The silence around you is so complete that you become aware of sounds you would never notice in the village. The first sound is your own breathing, a soft, regular tide that is more felt than heard. A faint movement of air in your throat that is accompanied by the gentle rustle of your wool face covering against the skin of your chin. The second sound is the wind, a low, continuous whisper that runs along the surface of the snow like a hand brushing against silk, rising and falling in tiny variations that are almost musical if you listen to them for long enough. The third sound is the ice itself, which is not silent, as people believe, but alive with a slow, deep voice that speaks at intervals too long to predict. As you sit, you hear a faint, distant thud that seems to come from far beneath you, a single note of bass that travels up through the water and the ice and into your body through the reindeer hide and your felt boots. This thud is the sound of the ice sheet settling, adjusting its enormous weight to the movements of the water beneath. And you've heard it so many times that it does not startle you. You simply register it the way you would register a distant door closing in a house you know well. After the thud, the silence returns even deeper than before, as if the sound has opened a space that the quiet rushes in to fill. You listen to the silence, and within it you begin to hear the smaller sounds that had been hidden all along, the faint, high ringing of your own blood moving in your ears, the soft creak of your outer coat when you shift your weight by a fraction, the tiny click of a snow crystal landing on the frozen surface near your knee. These sounds are so quiet that they barely exist, and yet they are there, a microscopic world of noise that surrounds you, and you let them wash over you without focusing on any single one. The cold continues to press its familiar weight against your cheeks, and you feel the skin there tightening as the surface blood vessels constrict to conserve heat. This tightening is not painful, it is simply a sensation, a signal from your body that the cold is doing its work, and you respond by pulling the fox fur hat slightly lower and hunching your shoulders inside the reindeer coat. Small adjustments that you make without conscious thought. The fur of the coat's collar is stiff with frozen breath, a small crust of ice that has formed where your exhalations have condensed and frozen, and the crust tickles your chin when you turn your head. You leave it there. You will melt it later beside the stove, and there is no reason to disturb it now. Inside your mittens, your fingers are curled loosely into your palms, each finger resting in its own small pocket of warmth that your body has generated and the sealskin has trapped. You wiggle your toes inside the felt boots, a slow, regular movement that is less about generating heat and more about reminding your feet that they still exist, that they are still attached to you and still capable of movement. The felt of the boots is thick and dense, matted from many seasons of use, and it holds the warmth of your feet like a loaf of bread holds the warmth of the oven. A steady, even heat that seeps slowly through the layers of foot wraps and into your skin. You remember the morning many years ago when your mother finished felting these boots, working the wet wool with her hands on the long wooden board until the fibers locked together into a fabric as tough as wood, and the memory passes through your mind without attaching to any emotion. A simple fact of your personal history that drifts by like a cloud. Time stretches around you, and you do not try to hold it or measure it. The breathing hole remains motionless before you, its dark water absorbing the light without giving any back, and you find that your gaze has softened until the hole is no longer a distinct object, but a general area of darkness in a field of white, the way a single note holds its place in a long, slow melody. Your mind, having nothing to attend to, begins to slow down, its thoughts becoming less frequent and less distinct, until they are not really thoughts at all, but impressions. Vague, shapeless movements of awareness that arise and dissolve without leaving a trace. You drift in this state for what might be minutes or might be longer, and when you return to a clearer awareness, you notice that the sun has finally risen above the horizon and is now a low, pale disk of white gold that you can look at directly, without squinting. A cold sun that gives light but no heat. The appearance of the sun changes the world around you in a way that is both subtle and profound. The ice field, which had been a uniform pale blue, now takes on a slightly warmer tone, a creamy ivory where the direct light falls, and a cool lavender in the shadowed hollows. The pressure ridge to your left glows along its top edge, as if lit from within, its translucent ice capturing the sunlight and holding it, while the far side of the ridge sinks into a deeper blue that is almost purple. Your own shadow, which had been a long, thin companion during the walk, has now shortened and sharpened. A dark cutout that lies on the snow to your right, with crisp edges that mimic the shape of your seated body, and the harpoon lying beside you. You glance at the shadow and see that the harpoon shadow includes the leather sheath over the iron head, a detail you had not noticed before, and you file this observation away without knowing why. The sun climbs slowly, though climbing is not quite the right word for its movement at this latitude and this time of year. It is more of a slow sliding, a gentle arc that will keep it low on the southern horizon all day, never rising high enough to feel warm, never reaching a point where it casts the short, sharp shadows of summer. You understand this arc in your bones, having watched it through many winters, and you know that the sun will reach its highest point around midday before beginning its equally slow descent toward the western horizon, where it will disappear again into the long night. The thought of the whole day stretching before you, hour after hour of sitting beside this hole, does not trouble you. It simply is, the same way the ice is, and the sky is, and the breathing hole is. Another sound from the ice reaches you, this one different from the distant thud you heard before. It is a sharp, cracking noise, higher in pitch and closer, a sort of splitting sound that seems to come from somewhere to your left, somewhere between you and the pressure ridge. You turn your head slowly, your neck stiff from the long stillness, and you look in the direction of the sound, though you know you will see nothing. The ice field looks exactly as it did before, white, unbroken, stretching away in a series of low, wind-sculpted undulations. The crack was simply the ice responding to the change in temperature as the sun's weak light touched its surface, a small expansion that created a small fracture, and the fracture has already settled, the pieces of ice grinding together and then locking into a new position. You turn your head back toward the breathing hole and the water is still black, still smooth, still reflecting its small unchanging piece of sky. The strip of dried fish inside your coat presses against your chest, and your stomach responds to the pressure with a faint, distant signal of hunger. You consider eating, but the signal is not strong enough to warrant the effort of untying the face covering and exposing your mouth to the cold air, so you ignore it and let the hunger settle back into its dormant state, a small, banked fire that will flare up again later. The lump of seal fat beside the fish will provide a longer, more sustaining warmth, but you save that for the deeper cold of the afternoon, when your body will need more fuel to keep its core temperature steady. You have learned to eat not when you are hungry, but when the cold demands it, a distinction that took you many winters to understand, and now you follow it without thinking. Your body has entered the deep, settled stillness that comes after the first hour of sitting, a state in which your muscles have relaxed into their positions and your joints have stopped complaining, and your mind has accepted that nothing will happen for a long time. In this state, you are aware of your own presence as a small, warm point in the vast cold, a temporary concentration of heat and awareness that will eventually return to the village and the stove and the sleeping shelf, but for now is simply here, motionless beside a hole in the ice. The breathing hole continues to offer nothing, and you continue to ask nothing of it, and this mutual absence of demand creates a kind of peace that you could not explain to anyone who has not sat on the sea ice through a winter morning. The wind dies away for a moment, a complete cessation that leaves the air so still you can hear the faint sound of your own eyelashes brushing against the wool of your face covering when you blink. In that absence of wind, the silence becomes absolute, a ringing emptiness that seems to press against your eardrums, and you hold yourself very still, listening to the nothing. Then the wind returns, a soft, tentative breath that barely stirs the loose snow crystals, and the world resumes its quiet whisper, and you let out a breath that you had not realized you were holding. The vapor plume is thicker this time, a sign that the air has grown colder even as the sun has risen, which is the way of winter mornings on the White Sea. You adjust your position on the reindeer hide, leaning forward slightly to shift the pressure from your sit bones to your thighs, and the new position brings you a few inches closer to the breathing hole. From this slightly closer vantage, you can see the thin line where the water meets the ice, a delicate rim of refrozen crystals that sparkles in the low sunlight. And you can see the way the dark water seems to curve away from the edge, a meniscus that is just barely visible if you look carefully. The water does not stir, and no bubbles rise from its depths, and no dark shape moves beneath the surface, and you let your eyes rest on the meniscus until it blurs and becomes part of the general darkness. The sun continues its slow slide along the horizon, and the shadows on the ice grow a fraction shorter, then a fraction longer, marking the passage of a morning that feels both endless and already gone. You have been sitting for what you estimate to be a little more than an hour, though you cannot be certain. And the prospect of many more hours of sitting does not disturb you because you are not thinking in terms of hours. You are thinking in terms of breaths, each one following the last, and in terms of the subtle changes in the light, and in terms of the small sounds that the ice makes. And these units of time are small enough that they pass without effort, one after another, like beads sliding along a string that has no end. The sun, now free of the horizon, hangs low in the southern sky like a pale brass coin that someone has polished thin and set gently on a grey cloth, and its light spreads across the frozen sea with a slowness that matches the slowness of your own breathing. You watch this light without expectation, your eyes half-lidded against the glare that rises from the snow, a glare that is not the harsh, blinding whiteness of a sunny day in late spring, but a softer, more diffuse radiance, as if the sun is shining through a layer of fine wool. The ice fields around you receive this light and hold it, their wind-polished surface becoming a mirror that reflects not a sharp image, but a wash of pale gold, the way old brass reflects a candle flame without showing the flame itself. As the sun inches higher along its shallow arc, the quality of the light begins to change, deepening from the watery silver of early dawn into a richer, warmer tone that brings out colors you had not seen before. The snow, which had appeared a uniform white, now reveals faint variations across its surface, patches where the wind has scoured the crust to a harder, glossier finish that gleams like polished bone, and other patches where the snow is softer, older, tinged with a hint of blue in the hollows and a creamy yellow where the direct rays fall. You notice how the light catches the tiny ridges that the wind has sculpted, each ridge no taller than a finger, and how each ridge casts a miniature shadow on its leeward side, a thin stripe of pale lavender that stretches across the white in a pattern of infinite repetition, ridge after shadow ridge, shadow after shadow, a texture so fine that it seems like the grain of a piece of wood magnified to the scale of a landscape. The pressure ridge to your left, that low wall of jumbled ice blocks that has been your only landmark since you sat down, now stands as a demonstration of what light can do to a simple material. The ice that forms the ridge is not the white, opaque ice of the flat plain, but older ice that has been compressed and fractured and refrozen many times, and its interior is filled with bubbles and cracks and layers of different densities. The sunlight enters this ice and travels through it along unpredictable paths, scattering and bending until the whole ridge glows with an internal light that is not quite blue and not quite green, a sort of aquamarine that seems to come from deep within the frozen mass. You have seen this color many times, and you know that it is simply the physics of light passing through clear ice. But the knowing does not diminish the quiet pleasure of watching it, a pleasure so mild it barely registers as an emotion, more like a slight warming of your attention, a gentle pull toward something that is neither useful nor important, but simply present. The shadows that the pressure ridge casts stretch away to the west, and as the sun continues its slow climb, those shadows shorten almost imperceptibly, retreating across the snow like a tide withdrawing from a flat beach. You watch the shadow line move, and you remember how, as a child, you tried to see the shadows move in real time, staring at a fixed point on the snow until your eyes watered. But you never could catch the movement itself, only the result of the movement when you looked away and looked back. Now you no longer try to catch it, you simply know that it is happening. The same way you know that your hair is growing, and the stars are turning, and the seal pups are swimming somewhere under the ice. All of it invisible, all of it certain. The sky above the sun has now brightened to a shade that hovers between pale blue and silver grey, a color that has no name because it exists only in this place and at this time of year. A few thin clouds drift across this sky, not the dense, heavy clouds of a coming storm, but high, wispy streaks of vapor that seem to be made of light itself, their edges dissolving into the blue before you can determine where the cloud ends and the sky begins. These clouds move very slowly from west to east, carried by a wind that does not reach the surface, and as they pass across the face of the sun, the light on the ice dims and then brightens again in a slow, silent pulse, each cloud casting a diffuse shadow that races across the frozen sea without sound. You watch one such shadow approach from the west, a darkening of the snow that travels towards you at the speed of the upper wind, and when it reaches you, the world around you softens, the glare fading, the shadows disappearing, the colors muting into a uniform gray that reminds you of the light just before dawn. Then the cloud passes, and the light returns, and the ice regains its golden gleam as if someone has uncovered a lantern. This play of cloud and light continues through the morning with a rhythm that is slow and irregular, each cloud different from the last, each period of dimness lasting a different length of time. Some clouds are mere wisps that pass in a few heartbeats, their shadows so faint you are not sure you saw them at all. Others are broad, thin sheets that spread across half the sky and dim the world for many minutes, turning the ice to pewter and the sky to pearl, a monochrome landscape that seems to hold its breath. During one of these longer dimmings, you take the opportunity to rest your eyes from the constant glare, closing them fully for a dozen slow breaths, and the darkness behind your eyelids is a warm, reddish brown that feels almost like a comfort after the brightness of the ice. You listen to the wind, which has risen slightly, the soft, steady push of air that makes a low humming sound as it passes over the irregularities of the surface, and you feel the cold settle more heavily on your shoulders now that the direct sun is blocked. When you open your eyes again, the cloud has passed, and the world is gold once more, the light seeming even brighter for the brief respite. The sun reaches the highest point of its shallow arc around what you estimate to be midday, though the word midday means little here, where the sun will not climb more than a few degrees above the horizon. At this subdued noon, the ice fields undergo a transformation that you have witnessed many times but that never grows entirely familiar. The light, now coming from its highest angle, penetrates the surface snow and enters the ice beneath, illuminating the frozen sea from within, so that the whole plain seems to glow, not with a reflected light, but with an internal radiance, as if the ice itself has become a source of illumination. The effect is subtle and difficult to describe. The snow loses its opacity and becomes translucent, a thin white skin over a body of pale green light, and the deeper ice, visible in patches where the wind has stripped the snow away, shines with a cold internal fire that seems to come from somewhere far below. You look down at the ice near your feet, where the reindeer hide protects a small patch of snow from the wind, and you see the light glowing through the crystals, each one a tiny prism that holds a spark of gold, and the whole patch of snow looks like a carpet of crushed diamonds that someone has spread across the sea. The breathing hole, that constant circle of dark water, refuses to participate in this illumination. While the ice around it glows and the snow sparkles, the water remains black, a circle of absolute darkness that absorbs the noon light without giving any back, the same way it absorbed the dawn light and will absorb the dawn light and the starlight after that. The contrast between the glowing ice and the dark hole is the most dramatic thing in the landscape. Though dramatic is too strong a word, it is more of a quiet statement, a simple fact of physics that your eyes find pleasing in the way that a balanced composition pleases, without calling attention to itself. The dark circle sits in the center of your vision like the pupil of an eye, and the glowing ice radiates outward from it like an iris of pale green and gold, and you sit at the edge of this great eye, a small, warm observer wrapped in furs. Your body, which has been still for so long that you have nearly forgotten it, sends you a small signal of discomfort, a stiffness in your right shoulder where the weight of the outer coat has been pressing on the same spot for hours. You respond to this signal with slow, deliberate movements, shifting your weight forward and to the left, uncurling your legs from their crossed position and stretching them out in front of you for a moment, the felt boots scraping softly on the snow. The change in position sends a rush of cool air into the gaps that had been sealed by your body's warmth, and you feel the cold, find the backs of your knees and the inside of your elbows, a brief, sharp reminder of the temperature that waits just beyond the boundary of your furs. You reach up with your right hand and adjust the sealskin drape that covers your shoulders, a piece of hide that you had not mentioned before but that has been there all along, a simple rectangle of fur that hangs from your collar, and provides an extra layer against the wind. The seal's skin is short-haired and dense, its surface worn smooth in places where the harpoon line has rubbed against it, and you pull it forward so that it covers more of your chest, tucking the edge under your arm to hold it in place. Then you draw your legs back into their folded position, settle your weight evenly onto the reindeer hide, and let the stillness return. The noon light, having reached its peak, now begins the slow descent toward afternoon, a change so gradual that you cannot see it happening, but can only infer it from the lengthening of the shadows and the slight cooling of the color temperature. The warm gold of midday begins to fade back towards silver, the ice losing its internal glow and becoming once again a surface that reflects rather than emits, and the shadows of the pressure ridge, which had shrunk to a narrow band of blue, begin to stretch out again across the snow, reclaiming the territory they had lost in the morning. The sun itself, which had been a pale disk of white gold, now takes on a faint orange tint as it approaches the thicker air near the horizon, a hint of the colors that will deepen as the afternoon wears on toward evening. A new set of clouds appears in the west, different from the high, wispy streaks of the morning. These are lower clouds, thicker and more substantial, their bottoms flat and grey, while their tops rise in rounded, billowing shapes that catch the sunlight and hold it. The clouds move eastward with a stately slowness, their shadows darkening large sections of the ice field, and you watch them approach with the same detached interest with which you have watched everything else. When a particularly large cloud covers the sun, the temperature drops noticeably, the wind picking up a sharper edge that finds the exposed strip of skin around your eyes and stings it gently, and you lower your chin into the high collar of the reindeer coat, letting the stiff fur shield your face. The cloud shadow turns the world into a study in grey. The snow is the grey of unbleached wool. The ice is the grey of a polished river stone. The breathing hole is the grey of charcoal, and the sky is a low, even grey that presses down on the ice without weight. The two elements merging at the horizon into a single, indistinguishable plane. You sit through this grey interlude without moving, listening to the wind strengthen and then weaken, watching the snow crystals skitter across the crust in little bursts, and you feel the cold working its way deeper into your layers, past the reindeer fur and the sheepskin, past the wool jacket and the linen undershirt, until it reaches the skin of your chest and rests there, a cool, persistent hand that your body pushes back against with its own slow furnace. The seal fat in your inner pocket calls to you with a faint promise of fuel, but the grey mood of the afternoon does not feel like the right time to eat, so you wait, and the cloud passes and the sun returns, lower now and more orange, its light travelling a longer path through the atmosphere to reach you. The light of the early afternoon is a softer light, a light that seems tired after its brief noon brightness, and it paints the ice fields in shades of rose and amber and the palest violet, colours that belong more to autumn than to winter, but that the low sun conjures anyway from the white surface. The pressure ridge glows once more, but the glow is warmer now, almost pink, the aquamarine of the morning replaced by a salmon hue that fades even as you watch it, shifting through coral to a pale lavender as the sun sinks another fraction of a degree. You follow these color changes with a quiet, patient attention, not naming them, not comparing them to anything, simply letting them pass through your awareness the way the clouds pass through the sky. Your own body has become so still that you can feel your heartbeat as a faint, distant pulse in your temples and your wrists, and the soles of your feet, a slow, steady drum that marks a time different from the time of the sun and the clouds. Your breathing has slowed to the point where each full cycle takes many heartbeats, the inhale drawing in the cold air with a soft, dry whisper, the exhale releasing a thin plume that is whiter now than it was in the morning because the air itself has grown colder even as the sun has moved across the sky. The plume hangs in front of your face for a moment before the wind takes it, and in that moment, the low sunlight catches the tiny ice crystals that fill the plume and makes them sparkle, a brief constellation of diamonds that appears and vanishes with each breath. The breathing hole, still motionless, still black, still reflecting its small circle of sky, remains the center of your attention, the fixed point around which all this slow theater of light revolves. You have not forgotten why you are here. The memory of the seals, their dark, sleek heads breaking the surface, their wet, whiskered faces turning toward you, remains present in the back of your mind like a low, constant hum. But the memory is not urgent, and the waiting is not anxious, because the light has given you something to watch, a slow, silent movie that has played out across the ice for hours and will continue to play until the sun drops below the western horizon and the colors fade into the gray of twilight. You watch the movie and you wait, and the two activities are the same activity, a single, continuous state of being that requires nothing from you except your presence and your patience. The quiet that surrounds you on the frozen sea is not the quiet of an empty room or a still night in the village. It is a quiet with substance, a quiet that has weight and texture, and a slow, living voice that speaks only when it chooses. You sit on the reindeer hide with the harpoon resting across your lap, your body so still that the fur of your outer coat has stopped rustling, and you listen to the silence the way you might listen to a person who is thinking before speaking. The breathing hole in front of you offers no sound of its own, the water too still to lap against the ice, too cold to release the small bubbling gases that rise in warmer seasons. And so the hole becomes a listening point, a dark ear turned toward the depths, and you sit beside it as a fellow listener, waiting to hear what the ice will say. The first sound you become aware of is not a sound from the ice at all, but a sound from your own body, the soft, regular passage of air through your nostrils as you breathe. Each inhale draws the cold air across the small hairs inside your nose with a faint, high whisper, so faint that you would never notice it in any other setting, and each exhale sends a plume of vapor through the wool of your face, covering with a gentle, muffled huff that fades instantly into the larger quiet. These breath sounds are so close to you that they seem to come from inside your own head, an intimate rhythm that has been with you since birth and will continue until you die, and you let them be without controlling or altering them, simply noting their presence as part of the background of being alive. Beyond your breath, there is the sound of the wind, which has been a companion since you first stepped out of the Isba in the dark morning. The wind today is not a steady blow, but a variable drift, and its voice changes as the air moves across the different surfaces of the ice field. When the wind passes over the smooth, polished crust of hard snow near the pressure ridge, it makes a low, silky hiss, like a hand brushing lightly against a length of fine cloth, a sound that rises and falls in tiny swells as the gust strengthens and fades. When the wind encounters the rougher patches of snow, the areas where the surface has been pitted by old footprints or etched by drifting granules, its voice becomes a slightly rougher shush, a sound with a faint grain in it, like sand being poured very slowly from a small cup. And when the wind finds the breathing hole itself, it stirs the air directly above the dark water and produces a subtle hollow note, a soft woof that is almost musical, the sound of a bottle when you blow across its mouth, though much lower and much softer, barely audible unless you are listening for it. These wind sounds come and go as the gusts come and go, creating a kind of slow, irregular music that has no melody and no rhythm, only a shifting series of tones and textures that drift across the ice, and then fall away into silence. You listen to this music without analyzing it, letting each sound arrive and depart on its own terms, and you notice that after a time your attention has become so accustomed to the wind that you hear it even when it is not there, a phantom hiss that your ears supply out of habit during the long pauses between gusts. Then, from somewhere far away, a deeper sound reaches you. It is a thud, a single, low note that seems to come not from any particular direction, but from everywhere at once, as if the entire ice sheet has been struck gently from below by an enormous padded mallet. The sound travels through the frozen sea and enters your body through the reindeer hide you sit on and the felt boots you wear so that you feel it as much as you hear it, a faint, dull vibration in your bones that lasts only a moment and then fades. You have heard this sound many times before, and you know that it is the voice of the ice itself, the sound of the great frozen plate settling into a new position, adjusting to the slow, inexorable movement of the water far beneath. The ice is not a solid, dead thing. It is a living roof over the sea, a roof that groans and creaks as it expands and contracts as the currents push against its underside as the weight of the snow shifts with the wind. This particular thud is deep and distant, a bass note played on a drum the size of a village, and the silence that follows it seems even deeper than before, a silence that rings with the memory of the sound. You wait, and the ice remains quiet for a long while, and you listen to your own breathing and the intermittent hiss of the wind and the faint creak of your outer coat when you shift your weight by a small fraction. The sun, now well into its slow afternoon descent, cast a pale tide light across the ice fields, and the shadows of the pressure ridge have lengthened into long blue fingers that stretch toward the east. The breathing hole reflects a patch of the pale sky, its surface still as smooth as oil, and you watch it while you listen, your eyes and ears working together to build a complete picture of the world around you. Another sound comes, this one different from the distant thud. It is a crack, a sharp splitting noise that seems to originate somewhere to your right, somewhere out on the open ice beyond the breathing hole, and it has a different character than the deep thud. It is higher, tighter, more sudden, the sound of a frozen branch snapping under pressure. The crack splits the silence cleanly, a single brittle note that rises quickly and then vanishes, leaving behind a faint, ringing aftersound that might be real or might be your ears trying to hold on to something that is already gone. You turn your head slowly, your neck stiff from the long stillness, and you look toward the place where the sound seemed to come from, but the ice field shows nothing different, only the same wind-rippled surface, the same pale light, the same empty horizon. The crack was simply the ice expanding or contracting, a small local adjustment that has already resolved itself, and you turn your head back toward the breathing hole and let the sound go. The ice, you reflect in a quiet, wordless way, is never truly silent. Even when the deep thuds and the sharp cracks are not sounding, the frozen sea is filled with a constant, low-level noise that is too faint for the human ear to catch, unless the conditions are exactly right. This noise is the sound of the ice crystals rubbing against each other as the sheet flexes, a subaudible grinding that goes on day and night, summer and winter, without pause. Sometimes when the air is very still and the wind has died entirely, you can almost sense this grinding as a faint, high-pitched hiss at the very edge of your hearing, a sound like the ringing that remains after a loud noise has stopped, except that it never stops. It only fades into the background of your awareness and becomes part of the general texture of existence. You do not hear it now, or perhaps you do, and you cannot tell the difference, which is the nature of the ice's quiet voice. Closer to you, within the small circle of your immediate surroundings, there are other sounds that come from your own body and your own equipment. The reindeer hide beneath you rustles whenever you inhale deeply, a soft, dry scrunch of fur against packed snow, and the sound is so small and so close that it seems intimate, a private conversation between you and the piece of hide that protects you from the cold. The harpoon across your lap occasionally emits a faint wooden creak as the spruce shaft responds to the temperature change, expanding or contracting by a microscopic amount, and the coil of sealskin line over your shoulder makes a similar sound, a soft, leathery squeak when the braided fibers rub against each other. The ice that has formed on the outer collar of your reindeer coat, a crust of frozen breath, crackles softly when you turn your head, a delicate tinkling sound like tiny glass beads being rolled between the fingers. All these small sounds combine to form a bubble of quiet noise that surrounds you and moves with you, a private soundscape that is yours alone. Beyond this bubble, the great silence of the frozen sea continues to hold sway, interrupted only occasionally by the deeper voices of the ice. You hear another thud, this one closer, somewhere beneath the ice sheet directly below you, and the vibration comes up through the reindeer hide and into your sit bones with a distinct low-frequency pulse, a gentle, almost pleasant sensation that reminds you of the way a cat's purr feels when the animal is resting on your lap. The thud is followed by a series of smaller, secondary sounds, a sort of grumbling that fades gradually away, as if the ice has made its statement and is now muttering to itself about the matter before falling quiet again. These secondary sounds are so faint that you cannot be certain you are hearing them. They might be real, or they might be your imagination filling the silence with patterns, the way a person lost in a dark room begins to see shapes that are not there. You listen to the grumbling fade, and then you become aware of another sound that has been present all along but that you have not noticed, the sound of your own blood moving through your body. It is not a heartbeat exactly, though the heartbeat is part of it, a low, regular thump that you can feel in your temples and your wrists and the pulse points behind your ears. The sound of the blood itself is a higher, softer sound, a sort of distant, roaring whisper that seems to fill your head when the external silence deepens. If you sit very still and hold your breath for a moment, the whisper becomes more distinct, a continuous rushing note that has no beginning and no end, the sound of a river that flows only inside you. You have heard this sound since childhood during long winter nights in the Izba, lying on the sleeping shelf and listening to the quiet, and you recognize it now as the fundamental noise of being alive, the bass note upon which all other sounds are built. You let your breath resume and the blood whisper retreats into the background again, overlaid by the more immediate sounds of the wind and the ice and your own clothing. The wind has picked up slightly, and it now produces a low, steady moan as it passes over the pressure ridge, a note that hovers near the bottom of your hearing range and gives the whole landscape a sense of slow, patient movement. The moan rises and falls in pitch as the wind speed changes, a wavering tone that is almost like a voice trying to form a word but never quite succeeding. You listen to this moan for a long time, and its constancy becomes a kind of comfort, a reminder that the world outside your furs is still moving, still breathing, still alive in its cold, remote way. From very far off, so far that the sound is barely a suggestion, you hear a new noise that is different from the thuds and the cracks. It is a wet sound, a soft, puffing exhalation that carries across the ice, and you recognize it instantly as the breath of a seal surfacing at some distant breathing hole. The sound comes once and is not repeated, and you understand that somewhere, perhaps a mile away, perhaps more, a seal has risen to the surface, taken a breath, and then descended again into the dark water. The sound is so faint that it might have been a trick of the wind, but you know it is real because your ears have been trained by many winters to pick out the sound of a seal's breath from among all the other sounds of the ice. The distant exhalation does not excite you because it is not at your hole, and you do not allow yourself to hope that the seal will come to your hole, because hoping is a form of expectation, and expectation leads to impatience, which the cold will eventually punish. You simply note the sound, file it away, and return your attention to the black circle of water in front of you. The breathing hole, that perfect dark aperture, continues to offer nothing but its own silence. The water inside is as motionless as it has been since you cleared the new ice this morning, and no bubbles rise from its depths, no ripples disturb its surface, no sleek head emerges to break the tension between air and water. You watch the hole and listen to the sounds around it, noting how the wind's voice changes when it crosses the circular opening, creating that hollow, bottle note that you heard earlier, and noting how the distant thuds of the ice seem to resonate in the water column before they reach your ears, a slight, subtle reverb that the liquid medium provides. The hole, in its own way, is an instrument, a sound portal that connects the world above the ice to the world below, and you are its audience of one. The afternoon wears on, and the light continues to fade toward the pale gold of the low sun, and the sounds of the ice shift and change with the dropping temperature. The cracks become more frequent as the air cools and the ice contracts, sharp, splintering sounds that pop randomly across the frozen plain, some close, some far, some single and isolated, others coming in small clusters like a handful of pebbles dropped onto a frozen pond. Each crack is slightly different in pitch and duration, and you listen to them without counting them, letting each one arrive and depart without clinging to it. One crack, particularly close and loud, makes you blink, but you do not startle. Your body has learned that these sounds are normal, expected, part of the ice's daily cycle, and that a startled hunter is a hunter who wastes heat on unnecessary movement. Between the cracks, the deep thuds continue to sound at long, irregular intervals, the slow heartbeat of the frozen sea, and you feel each one as a gentle pulse in the reindeer hide and the snow beneath. The combination of the high, sharp cracks and the low, deep thuds creates a kind of music that has no composer, a natural symphony played on an instrument the size of a sea, and you sit in the middle of it, a small, quiet listener wrapped in furs, hearing notes that no one else in the world is hearing, because no one else in the world is hearing, because no one else is sitting on this particular piece of ice at this particular moment. You close your eyes for a moment, not because you are tired, but because closing your eyes helps you to separate the sounds from their visual sources, and you let the auditory landscape fill your awareness completely. The wind moans softly, the ice cracks and settles, Your own breath whispers through your nose, your blood rushes faintly in your ears, and far away, at the very edge of your hearing, you imagine you can hear the sound of the sea itself, the deep, slow current that moves beneath the ice, a sound so low and so constant that it is less a sound than a pressure, a presence that holds everything together. You open your eyes again, and the breathing hole is still there, still black, still motionless, still waiting with a patience that matches your own. A small sound, very close, draws your attention. It is the faint, papery rustle of the dried fish strip inside your inner pocket as your chest expands with a deeper breath, a sound so small that a mouse might make more noise, and it reminds you that the fish is still there, waiting to be eaten. You consider it, but the hunger is not yet strong enough, and the act of eating would require you to move and to expose your mouth to the cold, which would disrupt the careful equilibrium of stillness you have established. The fish can wait, and you can wait, and the seal can wait, and the ice can wait. Everything can wait, because waiting is what this place is for, what this long grey afternoon is for, what the breathing hole and the harpoon and the reindeer hide and your own patient heart are all for. The hours as the long midday watch pass without event, without movement, without any change in the dark water of the breathing hole, and you sit through them the way a stone sits in a field, asking nothing, expecting nothing, sitting nothing, simply present. The sun has crossed its shallow noon peak and begun the slow slide toward the western horizon, and its light, which had been the pale gold of late morning, now thins into a cooler silver that makes the ice fields look harder, older, more like a surface that has been here since the beginning of the world and will remain here long after you are gone. The breathing hole continues to hold its small circle of reflected sky, and you continue to watch it, your eyes tracing the delicate line where the water meets the ice, a line that does not waver or shift because no seal has broken the surface to disturb it. You've been sitting for so long now that your body has forgotten what it felt like to move. The cold has worked its way through the layers of wool and fur with a patience that matches your own, finding the small gaps at your wrists where the mittens meet the sleeves, seeping through the stitching of your felt boots, where the thread is worn thin, pressing against the bridge of your nose with a steady, insistent weight that is not yet painful, but is no longer merely a sensation. The cold is not an enemy and not a friend, it is simply a condition, the normal state of the world during the sealing season. And your body understands this, even if your mind, in its occasional wanderings, sometimes forgets. You shift your weight by a fraction, leaning slightly to the left to relieve the pressure on your right hip, and the movement sends a small protest from your stiffened muscles, a dull ache that reminds you that you have been still for a very long time. Inside your felt boots, your toes have grown cold, despite the thick wool of your foot wraps and the slow, regular wiggling you have maintained through the morning. The cold begins at the tips of your smallest toes and spreads slowly inward, a gradual numbing that is not yet dangerous, but that you note with the detached attention of someone who has experienced this many times before. You know that when you finally stand up and walk, the blood will rush back into these cold places, with a tingling, burning sensation that is more unpleasant than the cold itself. But that knowledge does not hurry you. The cold toes are part of the waiting, and you accept them the way you accept the grey sky and the motionless water. You remember other days spent just like this one, days when the seals did not come, days when you sat on this same reindeer hide beside this same breathing hole from the dark of morning until the dark of evening, and the water remained as smooth as a polished mirror, and the harpoon stayed untouched beside you, and you walked back to the village with nothing but the stiffness in your joints and the cold in your bones. Those days were not failures, because failure implies a goal that was not achieved, and the goal of the seal hunter is not to catch a seal, but to be present at the breathing hole in case a seal comes. The catching, when it happens, is almost incidental, a brief interruption of the long stillness that is the true work of the winter. This understanding has been with you since you first began to hunt with your father, and it has settled into your bones as deeply as the cold itself, a quiet, patient philosophy that requires no words and no defense. The sky, which had been a varied canvas of clouds and light through the morning, now simplifies into a uniform grey, a single even tone that covers the entire dome from horizon to horizon. The high, wispy clouds of the earlier hours have merged into a continuous sheet of pale stratus that filters the sunlight into a diffuse, shadowless glow, and the ice fields below receive this light without reflecting it back, so that the whole world seems to be made of the same soft grey substance. The horizon disappears in this light, or rather it becomes difficult to tell where the ice ends and the sky begins, the two elements blending together at a boundary that is more a suggestion than a line. The result is that you seem to be suspended in a grey dome, a space without depth or distance, a room whose walls are made of frozen light. This loss of distance changes your perception in ways that are subtle but profound. The pressure ridge to your left, which had been a distinct and solid thing in the crisp light of morning, now appears to float slightly above the ice, its base obscured by the diffuse glow, its jagged edges softened into gentle curves. The breathing hole in front of you seems to be both very close and very far away, its dark circle hovering in the grey like a hole cut not in ice, but in the fabric of the world itself. Your own body, when you look down at your hands resting on your knees, seems somehow disconnected from you. The sealskin mittens and the fur sleeves belonging to a person who is sitting very near to you, but not quite in the same space. These perceptual shifts do not alarm you, because you've experienced them many times during long days on the ice. They are simply the result of staring at a uniform field for many hours, the visual system beginning to lose its grip on the cues that normally tell the brain where things are in space. You know that if you were to stand up and walk, the world would snap back into its proper geometry. The pressure ridge would resume its solidity. The breathing hole would be just a hole again, and your body would feel like your own. But for now, in the grey dome of the afternoon, you let the soft distortions play across your awareness without resisting them, the way you might let a dream play out without trying to wake yourself up. The silence of the midday is different from the silence of the morning. In the morning, the silence was filled with the small sounds of the ice settling, and the wind working its way across the crust, and your own breath condensing in the cold air. Now as the afternoon deepens, and the grey dome presses down, the silence becomes heavier, more complete, a silence that seems to absorb sound rather than contain it. The wind has died almost entirely, only the faintest stir of air moving across the ice, so faint that it cannot produce even the soft hiss you heard earlier. The ice has stopped cracking and thudding, its voice withdrawn into whatever deep place it goes during the stillest part of the day. Your own breathing seems muffled, the vapour plumes appearing and vanishing without the small, soft huff that usually accompanies them, and when you swallow, the sound inside your throat is loud and strange, a sudden, intimate noise that feels out of place in the great quiet. In this deep stillness, you become aware of the weight of your own clothing in a way you had not noticed before. The outer coat of reindeer fur presses down on your shoulders with a gentle, persistent gravity, and the coil of sealskin line across your chest adds its own small burden, and the fox fur hat sits on your head like a soft, warm stone. These weights are not uncomfortable. They are grounding, the physical evidence that you are still a solid body occupying a specific place, even when the grey light tries to dissolve the boundaries between things. You let your shoulders sink under the weight, and you let the weight hold you in place, a small anchor in a sea of grey silence. The breathing hole, that constant circle of dark water, has become the only point of visual contrast in the entire landscape. The ice around it is pale grey, the sky above it is pale grey, the air between is pale grey, but the hole itself is black. A black so deep and so pure that it seems to be a hole not just in the ice, but in the greyness itself, a puncture through which a darker reality shows through. You fix your gaze on this black circle, and it becomes a focal point that prevents your eyes from losing their ability to focus at all. A visual handhold in the smooth, featureless wall of the afternoon. The water does not move, does not ripple, does not reflect anything now that the sky has lost its features, and so it becomes less a surface and more an absence, a void that draws your gaze into it and holds it there. Time in the grey dome is not a sequence of minutes, but a single extended moment that has no beginning and no end. You do not know how long you have been sitting here, and you do not need to know, because knowing would not change anything. The seals are somewhere under the ice, swimming through the dark, cold water with their sleek, blubber-wrapped bodies, holding their breath for spans of time that would kill a human, navigating by senses you can only guess at. And they will come to the breathing hole when they come, or they will not come, and neither outcome is in your control. Your only task, your only purpose, is to be here, to be present, to hold your small space on the ice with patience and stillness. And you are fulfilling that task simply by continuing to sit, to breathe, to watch the black circle. Your stomach, which had been quiet all morning, now sends a more insistent signal of hunger, a low, hollow ache that reminds you that the warm barley you ate in the darkness of the Isba was many hours ago. You consider the strip of dried fish in your inner pocket, and this time the hunger seems strong enough to justify the effort of eating. You move slowly, very slowly, uncurling your right arm from its position around your knees and bringing your mitten to the fastening of your outer coat. The movement feels enormous after so many hours of stillness, your shoulder creaking like a hinge that has rusted, the fur of your sleeve brushing against the fur of your coat with a sound like a distant wind. You work your mitten free of your right hand, the sealskin peeling away from your warm, slightly damp fingers, and the cold air immediately wraps around your bare skin. A sharp, biting sensation that makes you hurry even though you are trying not to hurry. You reach inside the outer coat, then inside the wool jacket beneath, your fingers searching for the inner pocket where the dried fish waits. The fish is stiff and hard, its surface rough with dried salt crystals, and you break off a small piece with your thumbnail and bring it to your mouth, pushing aside the wool face covering just enough to slip the fish between your lips. The taste is intense and salty, a sudden explosion of flavor after hours of tasting nothing but the clean, empty air, and you work the fish with your teeth and tongue, softening it with saliva before you begin to chew. The chewing takes a long time because the fish is so dry that it resists breaking down, and you sit there in the grey silence, chewing slowly, your jaw working with a rhythm that is almost like breathing, while your bare hand grows colder and colder in the still air. When the fish is finally soft enough to swallow, you take another small piece, and then a third, until you have eaten enough to quiet the hunger. Then you tuck the remaining fish back into the inner pocket, pull your hand out, and work the mitten back over your cold fingers, feeling the warmth of the sealskin slowly begin to return as your hand regains its heat. The whole process of eating has taken perhaps 5 minutes, perhaps less, but it feels like a major event in the texture of the afternoon. A small island of activity in the great ocean of stillness, and when it is done, you settle back into your seated position and let the quiet wash over you again. The grey dome continues to hold, and the light continues to fade, though whether this fading is due to the sun's descent or to a thickening of the cloud cover, you cannot tell. The breathing hole remains black and motionless, and you watch it with eyes that are growing tired from the constancy of the grey light, a tiredness that manifests as a slight burning at the edges of your eyelids, and a tendency for your gaze to blur if you do not blink often enough. You blink more frequently now, each blink a brief dark respite that lasts only a fraction of a second, but that feels restorative, like a tiny sip of water for your dry eyes. The cold has now settled so deeply into your body that you have stopped noticing it as a separate sensation. It has become part of you, a background hum that underlies every thought and every perception, and you know that this is the dangerous stage, the stage where the cold can creep past your awareness and begin to slow your blood and thicken your thoughts without you noticing. The old hunters in the village have told stories of men who sat too long at the breathing hole, men who became so still and so cold that they simply stopped breathing, their hearts slowing to a crawl and then stopping altogether, and their companions found them hours later, seated upright on their hides as if still waiting, their eyes open and fixed on the hole, a faint smile on their frozen lips. These stories are told as warnings, but also as a kind of comfort, because dying from the cold of the breathing hole is not a bad death, it is a peaceful death, a slow fading into the grey dome, a merging with the ice and the sky and the silence. You are not going to die today because you know your limits and you have not yet reached them, but the stories are in your mind as you sit, and you let them be there without pushing them away. To keep the cold from deepening further, you make a small adjustment. You clench and unclench the muscles of your thighs and calves, a series of subtle contractions that you can perform without visibly moving, and the effort generates a small bloom of warmth that spreads through your legs and into your trunk. You do this every few minutes, a quiet internal exercise that you learned from your father, who learned it from his father, and it keeps the blood moving through the large vessels of your legs without requiring you to stand up or change position. The exercise becomes a rhythm, like breathing or blinking, and you let it run in the background of your awareness while your main attention remains on the breathing hole and the grey silence and the long, slow afternoon. The breathing hole, through all of this, remains unchanged. No dark shape rises into the water column. No bubbles disturb the surface. No sleek head breaks through the meniscus to take a breath and look at you with those large, dark, curious eyes that seals have. The hole simply is a circle of black in a world of grey, and you simply are a seated figure in furs beside it, and the afternoon simply passes, a slow river of moments that flows toward the evening without urgency or purpose. This is the long midday watch, the heart of the seal hunter's day, the hours that are neither beginning nor ending, but simply duration, pure and undiluted. A state of being that has no goal and no reward, but that is, in its own quiet way, the reason you come out here at all. A sound reaches you from somewhere out beyond the hummocks of old ice, a sound so faint that at first you mistake it for a trick of the wind, or a murmur from the deep ice itself. But then it comes again, a soft, wet exhalation that hangs in the still air for a moment, and then fades, and you recognize it for what it is, the breath of a seal rising at a distant breathing hole. The sound travels across the frozen plain with a clarity that the grey afternoon air sometimes allows, carrying over the ridges and the wind-sculpted snow without distortion, and it arrives at your ears as a gentle puff of noise, a reminder that somewhere in the vast white emptiness, life is continuing its quiet, underwater routine. You do not turn your head, because the sound has no direction that your ears can pinpoint, diffused as it is by the flatness of the ice and the uniform grey sky that presses down from above. You simply receive it, let it register, and then let it go, the way you might let a single raindrop land on your sleeve and then forget about it. The breathing hole in front of you remains unchanged, its dark surface as smooth as polished obsidian under the diffuse light of the clouded afternoon. No ripple disturbs the perfect circle of water, no bubbles rise from its depths, no shadow stirs in the pale green column that descends into the blackness below. The seal that breathed is not at your hole. It is somewhere out there, perhaps half a mile away, perhaps more, a dark, sleek body that has found another opening in the ice, another place where the frozen roof gives way to air, and it has taken its breath, and will now descend again into the cold, dark sanctuary of the sea. The knowledge that a seal is near, that one has come close enough for its breath to reach you, does not stir any excitement in your chest, because excitement is a kind of heat, and you have trained yourself over many winters to conserve your heat for the long hours of waiting. Instead, you feel a quiet acknowledgement, a small inward nod, a recognition that the world under the ice is not empty, that the seals are moving through their slow submarine lives, and that your presence at this hole is not in vain, even if no seal chooses to visit you today. You lean your head back slightly, tilting your face toward the uniform grey sky, and you let your eyes rest on the featureless expanse of cloud that covers the dome of the world from horizon to horizon. The sky offers nothing to look at, no breaks, no variations in tone, no hint of the sun that is somewhere above the cloud layer, sliding down its shallow arc toward the western horizon, and your gaze drifts without focus, your eyes finding no purchase on the smooth, even grey. The muscles in your neck, which have been holding your head upright for many hours, welcome the small change in position, and you feel a gentle stretch along the back of your neck, a soft release of tension that spreads down into your shoulders and reminds you that your body is still capable of movement, still a living, flexible thing beneath all the layers of wool and fur. The fox fur hat shifts slightly with the movement, the ear flaps brushing against your cheeks, and the cold air finds a new path across the exposed strip of skin above your eyebrows, a brief, cool touch that is not unpleasant. After a moment, you lower your head again, returning your gaze to the breathing hole, and you let the memory of the distant seal breath settle into the back of your mind alongside the other memories of this day. The dark walk out of the village, the slow lightening of the sky, the golden noon, the grey afternoon, the deep thuds of the ice, the sharp cracks, the hunger, the fish, the cold, the stillness. The breath has joined the long, slow parade of moments that have made up this day, and it does not stand out from the others in any particular way. It is simply another part of the texture, another thread in the fabric of the waiting. You accept this thread without pulling on it, without weaving it into a story about what might happen next, because the waiting does not benefit from stories, and the seals do not follow the plots that hunters imagine for them. The silence that follows the distant breath is deeper than the silence that preceded it. Or at least it seems deeper, the way a room seems quieter after a clock has stopped ticking. The wind has still not returned, and the ice has fallen into one of its long, quiet periods. And your own breathing is so slow and so soft that it barely registers in your ears. You listen to the silence, and you hear within it the faint, high ringing that is always there in the absence of other sounds, a tone that seems to originate inside your own head, a signature of the auditory system idling in neutral. The ringing is not unpleasant. It is simply there, a constant companion that you have known since childhood, and you let it be without attending to it. A background note in the great slow chord of the afternoon. Your mind, freed from the need to interpret anything new, begins to drift in a slow, aimless way, touching on memories and impressions without holding on to any of them. You think about the seals that are swimming somewhere beneath you, their bodies streamlined and powerful, their whiskers sensing the minute vibrations of fish moving through the dark water. The seals do not hurry, you remind yourself. They have no reason to hurry, because the winter sea is their home, and the ice is their protection, and the breathing holes are scattered across the frozen surface like doors in a ceiling, each one a portal that they can use when they need air. The seal that breathed near your hole, or near enough for its breath to reach you, has already moved on, sliding through the cold water with a grace that you can only imagine, and it will not think of you again. If seals think at all in the way that humans understand thinking, it simply knew that it needed air, found a hole, breathed, and then returned to its life beneath the ice. And you were close enough to hear that breath. And that is the entirety of the transaction between you and the seal on this grey afternoon. The acceptance of this distance, the gap between your hole and the seal's hole, between your need and the seal's need, settles into your chest like a soft, heavy stone sinking to the bottom of a still pond. You are not disappointed by the distance, because disappointment is built on expectation, and you have worked very hard, over many years, to remove expectation from your waiting. When you were a young hunter, still learning the ways of the ice, you used to feel a sharp, quick hope every time you heard a seal breathe nearby, and that hope would lift your heart and sharpen your attention and make you grip the harpoon with a new readiness. Then, when the seal did not come to your hole, the hope would collapse into disappointment, a heavy grey feeling that made the rest of the day feel like a punishment. Your father, sitting beside you on those early hunts, would notice the change in your posture and would say, in his quiet, unhurried voice, that the seals know their own business, and the hunter's business is simply to be present. It took you a long time to understand what he meant, but now, after many winters of sitting beside breathing holes, you understand it fully. The seal's breath is not a promise and not a rejection. It is simply information, a report from the world under the ice, and you receive it the way the ice receives the snow, without complaint and without demand. You shift your position on the reindeer hide, uncurling your legs from their crossed position and stretching them out in front of you for a moment, the felt boots scraping softly on the packed snow. The movement sends a rush of cool air into the space beneath your outer coat, and you feel the cold find the backs of your knees where the wool of your trousers has compressed from the long sitting, a brief, sharp sensation that is almost refreshing. You flex your toes inside the boots, working the small joints to stir the warm air trapped there, and you feel the slow tingle of returning circulation in the tips of your smallest toes, a sign that the cold has not yet numbed them completely. The reindeer hide beneath you has compressed into a warm, dense mat over the hours, its fur flattened in the shape of your body, and when you settle back into your seated position, the hide conforms to you like a second skin, a small, comfortable nest in the vast, uncomfortable cold. You draw your legs up again, folding them in front of you, and you wrap your arms loosely around your knees, returning to the compact posture that conserves the most heat. Your gaze returns to the breathing hole, that constant companion, that dark, still eye in the white face of the ice, and you note that a very thin skin of new ice has begun to form across the surface while you were not watching. The skin is barely visible, a transparent film that dims the reflection of the grey sky and makes the water look slightly cloudy, like a mirror that someone has breathed on. The formation of new ice is a slow, steady process that never stops in this cold, and you know that if you were to leave the hole for a day without clearing it, the ice would thicken from that thin film to a crust, then to a sheet, then to a solid cap that would merge with the surrounding ice and erase the hole entirely, as if it had never been. This knowledge does not alarm you, because you will clear the new ice before you leave today, and you will return tomorrow to clear it again, and the cycle will continue until the spring thaw or until the seal that you are waiting for finally arrives. The maintenance of the breathing hole is a small, quiet ritual that you perform without thinking about it, the way you tie your foot wraps or stir the coals in the stove, and it gives a shape to the days that the seal's absence cannot take away. The distant seal breath has faded from your awareness now, absorbed into the general texture of the afternoon, and you find that you can no longer separate the memory of the sound from the sound of your own breathing or the faint ringing in your ears. Was it a minute ago? An hour? You cannot say, because time in the grey dome does not pass in measurable units, and events that seem recent might have happened long ago, while events that feel distant might have occurred only moments before. This blurring of time is a familiar phenomenon, one that you have experienced on almost every long day on the ice, and you do not fight it. You simply let it happen, the way you let the grey light blur the horizon and the cold blur the boundary between your body and the air. There is a kind of peace in this blurring, a release from the need to track and measure and account for every moment, and you settle into that peace the way you settle into the reindeer hide, letting it hold you up without effort. The sky, which has been a uniform grey for so long that you have stopped noticing it, begins to show a faint, almost imperceptible darkening near the eastern horizon, a hint that the afternoon is advancing toward evening, though evening is still several hours away. The darkening is so subtle that you might be imagining it, a slight thickening of the grey that could be a change in the cloud cover or could be a trick of your tired eyes, and you do not invest any effort in determining which it is. The light will do what the light does, and the day will end when it ends, and you will walk back to the village when the time comes, and none of those things require your attention or your intervention. For now, there is only the breathing hole and the thin skin of new ice forming on its surface, and the memory of a distant seal breath, and the quiet acceptance that holds all of these things together in a single, seamless whole. You find that you are smiling slightly, or at least the corners of your mouth have lifted beneath the wool of your face covering, a small private expression that no one would see even if there were anyone here to see it. The smile is not an expression of happiness, because happiness is too strong a word for the quiet, grey mood of the afternoon. It is more of a softening, a gentle release of the subtle tension that you had not realized you were holding in your jaw. The distant breath of the seal, that soft, wet puff of sound from somewhere out on the ice, has reminded you that you are not alone in the world, that the frozen sea is not a desert, but a living place, that the seals are swimming their slow, silent paths beneath your feet, and that this knowledge by itself is enough. It is enough to know that the seals exist, that they are breathing, that they are going about their lives with the same patient, unremarkable persistence that you bring to your own life, and that the intersection of your life with theirs, when it happens, will happen on its own terms and in its own time. This understanding, which is not a thought so much as a feeling, a gentle settling of the heart, makes the long hours of stillness feel less like a waiting and more like a companionship, a quiet attendance at the edge of a world that you share with creatures you may not see today, but that you know are there. You let the smile remain for as long as it wants to, and then you let it fade, and your face returns to its resting stillness, the muscles around your eyes and mouth relaxing into the neutral, patient expression that you wear on the ice. The breathing hole continues to hold its dark circle of water, the new ice thickening by a microscopic amount with each passing moment, and you continue to sit beside it, watching, breathing, being. The distant seal breath, that small fleeting event that came and went without consequence, has left no mark on the world and no change in your circumstances, and yet it has left something, a quiet, enduring reminder that the waiting is not empty, that the silence is not dead, that life continues elsewhere under the ice, and that your presence here, patient and still and accepting, is part of that life, part of the great slow rhythm of the winter sea. This thought, if it can be called a thought, settles into your mind like a stone settling into the bottom of a pond, and you let the ripples subside, and you return to the simple act of sitting, of breathing, of watching the whole, of being present in the grey afternoon that stretches on without end. The moment when the light begins to drain from the sky arrives without announcement, a slow, gentle subtraction that you notice first in the way the grey dome above you deepens, from ash to charcoal, then to a soft bruised purple near the eastern horizon where the night is already rising. The breathing hole in front of you, that constant companion through the long, still hours, has grown darker as the new ice thickens across its surface, its black circle now a patch of deeper darkness against the grey of the surrounding snow. And you know, with the quiet certainty that comes from many winters of watching the sky over the white sea, that the time for sitting has ended. The sealing day, which began in the black of early morning and stretched through the pale gold of dawn and the grey stillness of afternoon, has now entered its final phase. The slow, gradual return to warmth and shelter and sleep, and you feel the transition not as a thought, but as a shift in the weight of the air, a subtle loosening of the cold's grip that signals the approach of evening. You stir from your stillness with movements that are careful and deliberate, because your body has been folded into the same position for so many hours that the joints have forgotten the shape of motion. Your knees, which have been drawn up against your chest inside the circle of your arms, protest with a dull, deep ache as you slowly uncurl them, straightening first one leg and then the other, the felt boots scraping across the packed snow with a soft, gritty sound that seems very loud after the long quiet of the afternoon. The reindeer hide beneath you has become a warm, compressed mat shaped exactly to the contours of your body, and when you lift your weight from it, the cold air rushes into the space you have vacated, a brief, sharp reminder of the temperature that has been waiting for you all along. You place your hands, still inside their thick sealskin mittens, flat on the ice on either side of you, and you push yourself upward with a slow, steady pressure, rising first to your knees and then, with a second effort, to your feet, where you stand swaying slightly as the blood begins to move through your legs in earnest. A tingling, burning rush that is both painful and welcome because it means you are still alive and still capable of walking home. Because it means you are still alive and still capable of walking the marine. The world looks different from a standing position after so many hours of sitting. The flat ice plain that had seemed to stretch into infinity when you were seated at its level now reveals its subtle contours. The low, wind-sculpted ridges catching the last of the twilight in pale, silvery lines, the pressure ridge to your left a dark, jagged silhouette against the fading western sky. The sun has already dropped below the horizon, though you did not see it go, hidden as it was behind the thick grey cloud cover that has blanketed the sky all afternoon. And what remains of its light is a thin, luminous band of pale orange and shell pink that lies along the western edge of the world. A faint, watercolor wash that will soon fade into the deeper blues and purples of the coming night. Above this band, the first stars have begun to appear, small and tentative in the darkening sky, and you recognize the constellation of the Elk already high in the east, its familiar pattern, a welcome sight that confirms the direction you will need to walk. You bend down slowly and stiffly and gather your gear from the snow beside the breathing hole. The wooden scoop, its handle cold and smooth in your mitten, goes first into its place at your belt, and then you lift the coil of braided sealskin line from your shoulder and loop it carefully, making sure the coils lie flat and even, so that they will not tangle during the walk. The harpoon, which has rested on the snow beside you through the whole long day, comes last, and you pick it up with the same careful, practiced grip that your father taught you, balancing the long spruce shaft across your shoulder so that its weight settles comfortably into the groove that years of use have worn into your outer coat. The reindeer hide, folded into its compact square, tucks under your other arm, and you feel the slight bulk of it pressing against your ribs. A small, soft burden that has been your companion through many days of waiting. You stand for a moment, fully loaded, looking down at the breathing hole one last time before you leave it to the night. The hole has already begun to seal itself, a thin, transparent skin of new ice covering the black water like a sheet of glass laid across a dark mirror, and you know that by morning that skin will have thickened into a crust that you will need to break with the scoop, the same small ritual that you have performed every morning of the sealing season. The water beneath the ice is still and silent, holding no trace of the seal that breathed somewhere in the distance earlier in the afternoon, and you feel no regret as you turn away from the hole, because regret implies that something should have happened differently, and the seals do what the seals do, and the hunter does what the hunter does, and today the paths of the hunter and the seal did not cross. This is not a failure, and it is not a success. It is simply a day, one of many, and it has been spent in the quiet company of the ice in the sky and your own patient breathing, and that is enough. You begin to walk, turning your back to the breathing hole and facing east toward the shore, which is still invisible in the gathering darkness, but which you can sense with the same internal compass that guided you out here in the morning. Your first steps are stiff and shuffling, your legs still adjusting to the demands of movement after the long paralysis of the weight. But within a dozen paces, the rhythm of walking has reasserted itself, and your body remembers the steady, ground-eating stride of the hunter returning home. The snow under your boots makes the familiar crunching sound that has been your walking companion since the dark hours before dawn, a sound that is deeper and softer now, because the surface has cooled since the weak afternoon sun touched it, and the crust has become more brittle, shattering under your weight with a low, resonant crackle that echoes faintly across the empty ice. The tracks you made this morning are still visible on the snow ahead of you, a line of shallow, rounded footprints that stretch away into the dimness, each one slightly softened at the edges by the wind's patient work, but still distinct enough to follow. You walk beside these tracks rather than in them, leaving a parallel trail of new footprints that will merge with the old ones by morning, and you find a quiet comfort in seeing the evidence of your earlier passage, a reminder that you have come this way before and will come this way again, that this path across the frozen sea is a thread that connects the village to the breathing hole and the breathing hole to the village, and that you are the shuttle that weaves back and forth along that thread, day after day, winter after the weaves back and forth. And thread they are. The twilight deepens around you as you walk, the pale band of orange on the western horizon fading through shades of peach and lavender to a deep, cold blue that matches the color of the ice in the shadows. The stars that had been tentative and few when you first stood up are now numerous and bright, scattered across the darkening dome like salt spilled on a black cloth, and the constellations that the Pomor people have named and known for generations. The elk, the hunter, the great sledge swing, slowly in their appointed places, each one a landmark in the vast, star-filled wilderness of the night sky. The moon, that thin crescent that had been lying on its back when you left the Isba in the morning, has long since set, and the starlight alone illuminates the ice fields with a soft, silvery glow that is just bright enough to see by, transforming the world into a landscape of pale blue shadows and darker blue hollows. A monochrome painting of immense, quiet beauty that you notice without pausing to admire, because the cold is now pressing more urgently against your back, and you are ready to be home. You pass the pressure ridge that has been your landmark through the day, its jagged blocks of old ice blowing faintly in the starlight with a pale, phosphorescent sheen that seems to come from within the frozen mass itself. The ridge looks different from this angle, its familiar profile altered by the change in direction and the deepening darkness, and you glance at it as you pass, acknowledging it with the same quiet nod that you gave the boulder on the shore path this morning, a small, wordless greeting to a familiar object that has been part of your landscape for many winters. Beyond the ridge, the ice stretches flat and featureless, a white plain that merges with the white sky at a horizon that is now almost completely invisible, the boundary between earth and air marked only by the point where the stars stop, a clean, dark line that you follow with your eyes as you walk. The sound of your footsteps on the crust has become a metronome that measures the passage of the walk, each step a small percussive event that is immediately swallowed by the immense silence of the frozen sea. You breathe slowly and steadily through your nose, the cold air sharp and clean in your lungs, and your exhalations form plumes of vapor that drift behind you, white against the dark blue of the sky, small ghosts that trail in your wake and then fade into nothing. The strip of dried fish in your inner pocket has been joined by the remaining lump of seal fat, both of them still uneaten, and you are aware of them as small hard presences against your chest, supplies that will be returned to the store in the Isba and saved for another day. The hunger that had stirred in the afternoon has subsided, replaced by a deeper, more fundamental craving for warmth, for the heavy heat of the stove, for the taste of hot tea, for the soft, enveloping comfort of the sleeping shelf, where you will lie down and let the day dissolve into sleep. After a time, you begin to see the shore, a low, dark line that emerges from the general darkness and slowly resolves into the familiar shapes of the frozen tide line and the beached boats beyond. The sight of the shore, even in the dim starlight, triggers a small, quiet shift in your body, a subtle relaxation of the vigilance that has held you upright through the long hours of waiting. And you feel your shoulders drop slightly, your stride lengthen, your pace quicken by a fraction. You are not hurrying exactly, because hurrying implies a need to escape from something, and there is nothing on the ice that you need to escape from. You are simply moving toward warmth and shelter with the same instinct that draws a seal toward its breeding hole, a gentle gravitational pull that increases as the distance decreases. The jumbled ice of the tide line is the first part of the shore that you reach, the frozen slabs and tilted blocks that mark the boundary where the sea ice meets the land, and you pick your way through this zone with the same careful, unhurried steps that you used this morning. The snow between the ice blocks is deeper and softer, cupping your boots in loose powder that slows your pace, and the sound of your footsteps changes from the sharp crunch of the sea ice to a muffled, shuffling whisper that is almost silent. The boats, those dark, whale-like shapes that you passed on your way out, now loom above you as you walk among them, their overturned hulls glistening with frost in the starlight. Their tarpaulins of reindeer hide stretched tight and frozen into rigid sculptural forms that resemble the carapaces of enormous insects sleeping in the cold. One of the boats, the nearest to the path, has a drift of snow piled against its starboard side, a smooth, sculpted wave of white that has been shaped by the wind into a curve as elegant as anything made by human hands, and you pass close enough to touch it, though you do not reach out, your hands kept warm inside your mittens, your harpoon balanced on your shoulder. Beyond the boats, the land rises in a low, gentle slope, and the snow-covered path that leads back to the village is still visible as a faint depression in the white surface, a shallow trough that guides your feet without requiring you to think. The boulder that you greeted this morning is still there, its snow-capped top catching the starlight in a soft, rounded glow, and you pass it with the same small, wordless greeting, a nod of recognition that marks the boundary where the shore ends and the village lands begin. The wind, which had been a steady, quiet presence on the sea ice, now drops as you move inland, blocked by the low hills and the clustered isbas ahead, and the sudden absence of its voice makes the world seem even quieter, a deep, ringing silence that is broken only by the crunch of your boots and the soft huff of your breathing. Then, as you crest the last low rise before the village, you see it, the clustered roofs of the isbas, low and dark against the slightly lighter darkness of the sky, their snow-covered humps looking like the backs of sleeping animals huddled together for warmth. The village is entirely still. No movement in the narrow paths between the houses, no voices calling out, no dogs barking, only the quiet, patient presence of the settlement waiting through the night for the return of its hunters and fishers. And there, in one window of the nearest isba, the one closest to the path, a lantern glows with a soft, warm orange light that is the most welcoming thing you have seen since the sun touched the horizon hours ago. The lantern light spills out through the small fish-skin window, diffusing into a gentle golden halo that illuminates the snow around the house and casts a faint, warm glow onto the path ahead of you, a beacon that has been lit by someone who knows that you are out on the ice and will return when the day is done. You walk toward that light, your steps slow and even, your body tired in a way that is deep and satisfying, the weariness of a day spent in stillness and cold, and you feel the warmth of the isba reaching out to meet you long before you reach the door. The smell of wood smoke is faint on the air, a thin, sharp scent that speaks of birch logs burning in the stove and the heavy clay warmth that fills the small house, and your body responds to that smell with a quiet, involuntary relaxation, the muscles of your jaw and your shoulders loosening as if they already know that the day's work is over. The smoke rises from the chimneys of the village in a few thin, straight columns, barely visible in the starlight, each one a thread of warmth connecting the houses to the cold, dark sky above. When you reach the door of your own isba, the heavy slab of pine with its felt-wrapped edges, you pause for a moment and look back over your shoulder toward the sea, though the sea is no longer visible from here, hidden behind the low hills and the darkness. The breathing hole is out there somewhere, a small dark circle of water that is slowly freezing over under the stars, and you will return to it tomorrow in the dark of the morning, and the day after that, and the day after that, for as many days as the winter lasts. But for now, the whole belongs to the night, and the seals, and the slow, patient cold, and you belong to the warm isba, and the stove, and the sleeping shelf that waits for you above the dying coals. You turn back to the door, lift the wooden latch with the same soft plunk that you heard this morning, and step inside, letting the heavy slab swing shut behind you and seal out the darkness and the cold. The door of the isba swings shut behind you with a soft, heavy thump that seals away the frozen night, and you stand for a moment just inside the threshold, your body still wrapped in its many layers of wool and fur, your face numb where the cold has been pressing against it for hours, your eyes adjusting to the warm, dim light that fills the small wooden house. The lantern that you saw from the path rests on the rough-hewn table near the stove, its flame a steady golden teardrop that casts a soft, trembling glow across the log walls and the packed earth floor and the dark shapes of the pots hanging from their pegs, and the light seems to welcome you without words, a quiet, patient presence that has been waiting for your return since the afternoon. The stove, that great clay and brick mass that fills a third of the room, radiates a deep, drowsy heat that you can feel even through your frozen outer garments, a heat that presses gently against your cold cheeks and begins at once to loosen the stiffness that has settled into your joints during the long walk home, and you close your eyes for a single, slow breath, letting the warmth wash over you like water, letting the smell of birch soak and dried herbs and old wood fill your lungs. Let you ready. When you open your eyes again, you begin the slow, methodical process of shedding the layers that have protected you through the day, a process that is the reverse of the one you performed in the dark of the morning, but that follows the same quiet choreography. You place the harpoon in its corner, leaning the long spruce shaft against the wall where it will wait for tomorrow, and you unloop the coil of braided sealskin line from your shoulder, hanging it on its peg with a motion that is slow and careful, because your fingers, even inside the mittens, are still clumsy with the cold. The reindeer hide, that faithful companion through the long hours of sitting, gets unfolded and draped over a wooden rack near the stove where it will dry slowly and be ready for the next day, its fur still holding a faint chill that the warmth of the room will gradually draw out. Then you turn your attention to your own body, to the garments that have been your second skin since before the stars faded, and you begin with the mittens, working each one free from your stiff fingers with a gentle, patient tug, the sealskin peeling away to reveal hands that are pale and slightly wrinkled from the long confinement, the fingertips cold but not numb, the knuckles stiff but still mobile, and you flex your fingers slowly, watching them move as if they belong to someone else, feeling the warmth of the room seep into the Bailacaligas tiger. The fox fur hat comes next, its ear flaps untied with fingers that are becoming more nimble by the moment, and you lift the hat from your head and hang it on a peg beside the door, where the frost that has formed on the fur from your frozen breath will melt and drip onto the stones below, a small dark puddle that will be gone by morning. Your hair, damp with the sweat of a day's effort even in the deep cold, cools rapidly in the air of the room, and you run your fingers through it once, a brief, absent gesture that feels good after the long imprisonment of the hat. The outer coat of reindeer fur, heavy and stiff with the cold that has soaked into its fibers, comes away from your shoulders with a slow, deliberate shrug, and you catch it before it can fall and drape it over a wooden pole that runs along the wall, spreading the fur so that the warmth of the stove can reach every fold and drive out the chill. The sheepskin jacket beneath it follows, then the wool overshirt, then the heavy felt trousers, each garment hung with care on its designated peg or pole, each one still holding the shape of your body as if you are leaving behind a series of hollow versions of yourself, a row of empty hunters who will wait for you through the night. The foot wraps, those long strips of undyed wool that have protected your feet since the dark morning, come off with a slow, unwinding motion that you perform while sitting on the low bench near the stove, your back warmed by the radiant heat of the clay wall, your legs stretched out in front of you with the felt boot discarded on the floor. The wraps are damp with the moisture that your feet have produced through the day, a moisture that the cold has kept at bay, but that the warmth of the room is now releasing. And you spread the strips over a pole near the stove to dry, turning them once so that the heat can reach all sides. The felt boots, thick and dense and still holding the shape of your feet, go onto the warm stones at the base of the stove, where they will sit through the night and be dry and ready by morning, their soles slightly darkened with the damp that has seeped up from the snow. Your bare feet, pale and wrinkled and still cool to the touch, press against the packed earth floor, which is not cold but comfortably neutral, warmed by the mass of the stove that extends beneath the clay surface, a gentle subterranean heat that rises up through your soles and into your body. A basin of water sits on a low stool near the stove, a shallow wooden bowl filled with water that has been warming gently through the evening, its surface steaming faintly in the dim lantern light, and you kneel beside it with a slowness that your stiff knees appreciate. The water is not hot, only lukewarm, but it feels like a luxury after the long day on the ice, and you dip your hands into it with a quiet sigh that you do not consciously produce. A sigh that comes from somewhere deep in your chest and rises through your throat before you are aware of it. The water softens the last of the cold that clung to your skin, and you rub your hands together slowly, working the water between your fingers and over your palms, watching the way the lantern light catches the tiny ripples you create, the way the surface of the water trembles and then stills. You splash a small amount of water onto your face, the lukewarm liquid, a brief gentle shock against your cold-chapped cheeks, and you rub the skin there as well, feeling the grit of the day's exposure wash away into the basin, leaving your face feeling clean and slightly raw and very much alive. A rough cloth of woven linen hangs from a peg beside the basin, and you dry your hands and face with slow patting motions, the coarse fibers a familiar texture against your refreshed skin. Now, with your body freed from its layers and your skin clean and your blood moving warmly through your limbs, you turn to the simple rituals of evening nourishment, the food and drink that will fuel your sleep and prepare you for another day of waiting on the ice. A pot of water has been sitting on the stovetop, kept just below boiling by the steady warmth of the coals, and you lift it with a folded cloth to protect your hand and pour the hot water into a heavy clay cup that has been waiting on the table. A bundle of dried herbs, the leaves of the fireweed that grows in the brief summer months and is gathered and dried by the women of the village, hangs from the rafters, and you crumble a small pinch of the leaves into the cup, watching them unfurl in the hot water and release a faint, earthy fragrance that rises with the steam. The tea, if such a simple infusion can be called tea, is not strong and not flavored in any way that a southern person would recognize, but it is warm and it is wet, and it tastes of the summer that has been stored against the winter, and you hold the cup in both hands, feeling the heat seep through the clay and into your palms, while you wait for it to cool enough to drink. The bread is a dense, dark loaf of rye flour and a little barley, baked in the oven of the stove several days ago, and now slightly stale, but still good, still nourishing, still the same bread that has sustained Pomor families through countless winters. You break off a piece with your hands, the crust cracking under your thumbs, the dark interior releasing a faint, sour smell of fermentation that is as familiar as your own name, and you set the piece on a wooden board beside the lamp. The remaining strip of dried fish that you carried in your inner pocket all day, uneaten because the hunger never grew urgent enough, comes out of the pocket of the sheepskin jacket and joins the bread on the board, its surface rough with salt crystals and its flesh hard and leathery. You sit on the bench near the stove, your back against the warm clay wall, your bare feet resting on the packed earth, and you eat slowly, breaking the dried fish into small, manageable flakes that you chew one at a time, alternating with bites of the dense bread that soften in your mouth and become sweet as you work them with your teeth. The tea, now cool enough to sip, washes down each mouthful with a warmth that spreads through your chest and settles in your stomach alongside the bread and the fish. A quiet, internal fire that your body welcomes after the long, cold day. The lantern on the table flickers once, a brief, fluttering dip of the flame that you notice without looking up, and the sound of the wind outside begins to rise as the night deepens and the air over the frozen sea stirs with a new, slow energy. You hear the wind as a low, distant voice, a hum that threads through the cracks in the log walls and the chinks around the door, and then you hear it as a higher, softer note in the chimney, a gentle moan that rises and falls in slow, irregular cycles. The voice of the winter speaking to the warm room and the sleeping village. The wind sound is not loud and not threatening, only present, a reminder that the cold world continues to turn beyond the walls of the Isba, that the breathing hole is sealing itself under the stars, that the seals are swimming their dark paths through the water beneath the ice, and that you are here, inside, safe and warm and fed, with nothing more to do until the morning. When the meal is finished and the cup is empty and the board is wiped clean, you rise from the bench with a slowness that is now less about stiffness and more about the deep spreading drowsiness that has begun to fill your body like warm honey poured into a jar. The sleeping shelf above the stove, a wide platform of smooth planks that has been the bed of your family for generations, waits for you with its sheepskin mattress and its heavy quilt of patched wool. And you climb the short ladder with the practiced automatic movements of someone who has done this every night of every winter since childhood. The shelf is warm, deeply warm, heated from below by the mass of the stove that holds the fire's energy like a stone holds the sun's heat after dusk. And when you lie down on the sheepskin, the warmth rises through the wool and into your back and your shoulders, and the backs of your thighs, a full-body embrace that seems to press you gently into the soft surface. The quilt, heavy and familiar, settles over you with a weight that is comforting rather than oppressive. Its patched squares of different wools and linens, a map of your family's history, each patch a remnant of a garment worn by someone you loved or someone you never knew, all of them stitched together to keep you warm through the long winter nights. You lie on your back with your arms at your sides and your eyes open, staring up at the low ceiling where the shadows of the rafters shift in the lantern light, and you listen to the sounds of the house settling around you. The stove makes a quiet, ticking sound as the coals burn down and the clay cools by microscopic degrees, a sound that is almost like a clock marking a time that has no numbers, a slow, irregular rhythm that you have heard every night of your life. The wind in the chimney continues its low, mournful song, a note that hovers on the edge of hearing, and you let it be a lullaby, a familiar voice that tells you the world outside is still there and still cold, and still moving through its ancient, patient cycles. Your body, which has been braced against the cold for so many hours, now unbraces itself completely. The muscles of your back and your neck and your jaw, releasing tensions that you did not know you were holding, and you feel yourself sinking into the sheepskin as if the sleeping shelf were not a solid thing, but a soft, warm pool that is slowly absorbing you. Your breathing slows to a rhythm that is deeper and more regular than the breathing of the day, each inhale drawing the warm air of the Isba into the bottom of your lungs, each exhale releasing a thin, invisible stream of air that joins the general warmth of the room, and you let your thoughts drift without direction, touching on the images of the day and then letting them go. The starlight on the snow, the pale gold of the sunrise, the grey dome of the afternoon, the distant breath of the seal, the crunch of your boots on the path home, the glow of the lantern in the window, the taste of the bread and the tea, the warmth of the water on your hands. All of these moments rise into your awareness like bubbles rising through the dark water of the breathing hole. And then they dissolve, one by one, leaving behind only a quiet, diffuse sense of pets has no shape and no name. You do not hold on to any of the moments, and you do not push any of them away. You simply let them pass, the way you let the clouds pass over the sun during the morning, the way you let the shadows lengthen across the ice during the afternoon, the way you let the seal's breath fade into the great silence of the frozen sea. The lantern on the table, its oil nearly spent, begins to flicker more frequently, the flame dancing and shrinking and then recovering, and the light in the room grows dimmer and softer, the shadows deepening into a warm golden darkness that is almost a color you can feel. You watch the shifting light on the ceiling for a while, your eyelids growing heavier with each slow blink, and then you close your eyes completely and let the darkness behind your lids become the whole of your world. The sounds of the house continue around you, the ticking of the stove, the moan of the wind, the faint, distant creak of a beam settling into its place, and these sounds become a kind of blanket that wraps around you, a sound quilt that is as warm and as heavy as the wool quilt on top of you, holding you in a cocoon of quiet noise that is the opposite of the silence on the ice. but that serves the same purpose: to hold you still, to keep you calm, to guide you gently toward a sleep that is deep and full and at fage priestake. The cold of the day, which had settled so deeply into your bones that you thought it might never leave, is now a distant memory, pushed out by the steady, patient warmth of the stove and the sheepskin and the quilt and your own slow, quiet metabolism. You feel the last remnants of the cold as a faint tingling sensation in the tips of your fingers and the edges of your toes, a sensation that is fading even as you notice it. And then you feel nothing but the soft, even pressure of the bedding and the gentle rise and fall of your own chest as you breathe. The day has been long and still and cold, and it has asked nothing of you but your patience and your presence, and you have given both without reservation, and now the day is releasing you, letting you go, handing you over to the night and the sleep and the quiet, unseen repair that your body will perform while you drift in the darkness. You turn onto your side, a slow, heavy movement that is the last conscious action of the day, and you curl your body into the position that you have slept in since you were a child, your knees drawn up slightly, your hands tucked under the pillow that is not a pillow, but a folded piece of sheepskin, your face turned toward the wall of the isba, where the logs are dark and smooth and faintly visible in the dying glow of the lantern. The wind outside has risen a little more, its voice a steady low note that seems to come from a great distance, and you hear it as a sound that has been playing over the White Sea since long before you were born and will continue playing long after you are gone, a sound that asks for nothing and promises nothing but that is, in its own way, a kind of music, a winter hymn sung by the air and the ice and the frozen land. You listen to it for a few more breaths, and then you stop listening, and the sound becomes part of the darkness, a texture rather than a voice, and you slide without effort over the edge of waking and into the deep, still pool of sleep that has been waiting for you all along, a sleep without dreams, without movement, without any awareness of time passing, a sleep as dark and as peaceful as the water beneath the ice.